Here, it says you saw. Jesus. So we should. Yeah. Maybe you need to take his seat.
I wouldn't.
That's.
He's a good man.
Anything you. There's so much you've done. Like, what are the big. Okay.
Fact that we're on location, motion picture on the
Oh, go mention. And heard. Then 2:30. All right. You need a pen. Hey, good morning. Hi. I can't believe I got you down on like no. Were you coming down already? Okay. Okay. So we didn't just invite you down for lunch. Okay. I was like, oh, Margaret, she's got a life. Excuse me, sir. Dun, dun, dun. Morning, folks. How are you? After you.
Thank you.
Is this like the through the?
No, but it's like down the hall.
I see. Are you going to Paris with us?
I don't know.
You know I'm always so used to Bloomberg, and we do this thing every year with City Lab.
Yeah, Mike and I
And-
would you know, I'm on the Global Covenant of Mayors.
Uh-huh.
I'm the only U.S. mayor on his board. Yeah, I won't.
If you
be
want to
doing
come
that.
over, I'll get you over. He's buying the tickets. That's a sign of a
Atlantic
balanced,
Live, Margaret Lowe.
thoughtful, not
she's
dogmatic. That's not Elizabeth Warren, with all due respect to Elizabeth
no, no.
Warren.
Good morning,
You know,
good
and then
morning.
they got the
As you
California-
just heard, or maybe
Every
you
one of
didn't
us said
hear,
she
I
should
am
run.
Margaret
She
Lowe.
should
I'm
run.
president of Atlantic Live,
We're
and it
working on
is wonderful to see such a full house this morning in this extraordinary venue. You are here for the second annual edition of the Future of Work Atlanta. It feels so right to be here in Tech Square for this conversation, a community of innovation where students and budding entrepreneurs work alongside Fortune 500 companies to create the future. Our purpose this morning is to understand what that future holds, the future of work. I'm going to start by painting a picture of the landscape today, just to put a few things in context. So bear with me because I'm going to share a few numbers. 150 million Americans are in the workforce. 2 out of 3 of those Americans work in the service sector, with healthcare, education leading the way, followed by business, retail, and manufacturing. Nearly 15 million Americans are self-employed, 10% of the workforce. On average, women earn 83 cents on the dollar compared to men, and these wage gaps are exacerbated by race and class. Millennials now make up the largest generation in the workforce, and we are seeing an uptick in the number of older workers too. Some because they want to continue to work, others because they haven't saved enough to retire, and given their precarious circumstances, can't stop working. We're here to understand the who, what, where, when, and why behind those numbers. Who is working? What are we doing? Where are we working? When do we work? And why? And now the how. How is all this changing? For generations, Americans have defined themselves by what they do. Access to a good education, a good job, and being able to provide for our families were the essential building blocks of what we always called the American dream. But that story is evolving with rapid disruptions in technology, globalization, and the changing economy. And these factors have left many Americans uncertain about the future, what the future holds, and prompt questions about how we're preparing, educating, and training our workers. We're here in Atlanta because this city embodies what is happening across the country. Some of the biggest companies in the world are here. Traditional industry sits side by side with startups. There is a diverse economic base and a diverse workforce, and this city has a thriving educational institutions of all shapes and sizes. I do want to thank our underwriters, Lumina Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and Georgia Power for making today possible. We could not do this without you. Before we get rolling, a few practical notes. Please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. We are on Twitter. So modern, all one word. We would love you to join the conversation using the hashtag FutureWork2017. Again, that's one word. And we'd love you to join the conversation in the room, too. We're going to have time for your questions throughout the morning. It's power-packed. I'm sorry, I'm popping a little bit.
Good man.
The coffee will be free-flowing. Don't hesitate
The
to
Economist did a
get up
really
and
nice
grab a
piece
cup
on
along
this.
the way, and there will be a stretch break, too. To kick
He's
us
a
off,
conservative
we'll
Republican movement.
begin with what's happening right here in Atlanta. For that conversation, it is my great pleasure to welcome the mayor of this city, Kasim Reed.
Hey,
Mayor, good morning, Mayor.
Mayor,
And here
thank
to
you.
lead the
Hey, Steve.
conversation, my colleague, Steve Clemens, the Atlantic's Washington editor at large.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Mayor, it's a great pleasure. We've done that. We've been around this rodeo a few times,
We
so
have.
nice to be with you
I
again.
feel at home.
So you're not running again, right? So the
I'm running
law
for the
stopped you.
Bahamas. Yeah,
Yeah.
As soon as they get it cleaned up, I'll be.
Yep. You're going down Bahamas. You ought to help out down there. They need a
Oh, I
little
will help. I'm gonna start a little fruit stand.
So if you were running again, like if there were a law that allowed you to run again, you were going to be mayor of this great city again, what would you critique about the last 8 years that you didn't get done? What would be the next things that you said for Atlanta would continue to make it a great place, a better place? What didn't you finish in your roster?
I'd go bigger into the education space. In our system, the City of Atlanta School Board is independent, and while I wouldn't try to take control of the system, I would probably go to the state and ask them to add 2 citizen members, because I think it would be really interesting to have private sector leaders appointed to the school board. And while our school board has had significant improvement, when I took over, we were in the midst of the worst cheating scandal in America. So we stabilized it, recruited a first-rate superintendent, but I would go deeper there. But at the time that I got elected, we also had a $1.5 billion underfunded pension. And I felt that it was too much to try to resolve a pension crisis and take control of the system. Now that the city of Atlanta is in the best financial shape that it's been in 40 years, with a AA plus credit rating from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, one of 10 cities in America with a credit rating of that kind, $200 million in cash reserve, 7 balanced budgets, 7 unqualified audits. I turn
You
more
got that
towards
good
kids.
list of things down there.
I got to get it in, man. It's 18 minutes.
Yeah. So does Rahm Emanuel give you a call and say, God, how did you do that? Can I take a class? I mean, the pension
Well-
problem in Chicago is staggering.
Well, Steve, you know Ron well enough
Yeah.
to know he would never say anything like that. But Ron and I are friends, and he actually did school reform first and then pension second. Our dynamics are a little different. When I took over, Atlanta had $7.4 million in reserves and was spending 18% of all of our cash on pensions. And in my opinion, it was headed towards a Detroit-like outcome. And so I felt like I didn't have time not to get the fiscal house in order. And then being really candid, I'm also a black man. So I only won by 714 votes. And I felt that if we didn't have very strong financial performance, then my reelection would be in doubt. And I really wanted to be mayor.
You know, when you give an interview, what's interesting is you drop Nathan Deal's name like all the time, the governor. You love Nathan Deal. You love this conservative Republican governor of Georgia. Is he as nice to you in interviews?
He's as nice to me as I am to him because we built a good relationship over 7 years, one that's cooperative, and one that just 10 days ago led to the highest level of employment in the region since it's been recorded. When we got elected, we were both at a ditch. So people don't really reflect on it much now, but in 2010, we were in the heart of the worst recession in 80 years. And everybody in every audience we were looking out to was worried about their jobs, Steve.
Right.
So the conversation that we had very early on in our relationship was there's about 80% of stuff that we're just never going to agree on. But there's about 20% that we do agree on. And we felt like if we worked real hard on that 20%, which was job creation, infrastructure, investment in education, and making Atlanta and Georgia the best place to do business, then he'd be okay in his politics and I'd be okay in mine. But as you know, when you go through very tough situations with people, you have a sense of who they are. And through that time, I believe he's a good man. And tonight, I'll be giving him an award at the Four Pillars Award tonight.
Wow.
And you know who benefits? Not a bunch of politicians, the people in the region. And so now you all are visiting here, a magazine as prestigious as yours in here. And men lie, women lie, but numbers don't lie. Unemployment cut in half, third largest concentration of Fortune 500, busiest airport on the planet Earth, population up to record levels. And so the data suggests that a Republican governor and a Democrat mayor do very well in business development. Because when we go and recruit NCR, which is right down the block, 5,000 new jobs with average salaries that higher than $75,000 moved from the suburbs, 1 block from where we're sitting right now, built a $350 million campus. Porsche Cars, North America's biggest investment outside of Germany is right down the road at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Pulte Group Homes, the second biggest home builder in America, left Michigan and went right up the street by a MARTA station. When you're getting those kind of results, you know, you stay friends with the governor.
So what are you getting right? You know, one of our topics today is the future of work, but it's also the future of work here. And many people think that work is going to change, that people's relationship with their employers are going to change. You're going to have many young people get comfortable with hopping to job, or what they call the gig economy. We're going to have self-driving vehicles and automation that creates some churn in what jobs look like. Are you beginning to anticipate, you know, as a person who runs a city and worries about the future, do you think about those issues?
I think about it all the time. It's really why conversations like the one we're having is so important. Case in point, 10 days ago, we started the North Avenue Smart Corridor. Bud Peterson, who's the president of Georgia Tech, is here. He is leading an innovation corridor that will have all of the state-of-the-art technology and really be a living lab for self-driven vehicles, for traffic lights that anticipate traffic. All of the best-in-class technology is going to be executed on the North Avenue corridor, which has Georgia Tech, the Coca-Cola World Headquarters, and Ponce City Market. It's going to be a living lab for the city of Atlanta. The other thing is you really have to anticipate where the energy is and make sure that your city is the best version of itself. 7 years ago, we didn't have a motion picture business in the city of Atlanta. Governor Deal and I worked together to incentivize that. Today, we are the #1 location in the world for television and motion picture production. So that sector has gone from $350 million to a $9.5 billion sector for us. It's also really sexy. So it helps to attract the technology core and people that wear fancy jeans that cost $500 and sit in the cars and play on their phones and stuff like that and swipe, 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 swipe.
You know, let me ask you, you know, one of the things, a lot of people have looked at studies is why does Silicon Valley work as well as it did? And they said one of the big drivers is it had a culture that looked at talent wherever it may be. Now a lot of people saying Silicon Valley has its own lack of inclusion, lack of diversity, but the mystique of Silicon Valley was you could be gay, you could be from India, you could be from the South, you could be from wherever you were, and if you were good at coding, you were good at what you were doing, you could basically get in. And I'm interested in the legacy of Georgia, of the South, and these challenges of inclusion, of diversity. You seem to be mastering them in ways that are different than the states around you. Am I wrong? Am I right? What is the secret sauce of getting inclusion better than your neighborhood?
We had a guy named Robert Woodruff that worked at Coca-Cola and a man named Martin Luther King. And Dr. King won the Nobel Peace Prize, and people all over America were celebrating him, having dinners and wonderful occasions in places like New York and Los Angeles and Chicago. Business community looked around and said, how in the world can we not celebrate this guy? But at that time, nobody wanted to celebrate him. So Robert Woodruff and the CEO of Coca-Cola went down to the Capital City Club, and they picked up the phone and started calling business owners one by one and said, I'm having a dinner for Dr. Martin Luther King, and if you'd like to continue to have dinner with me, I'd like for you to come and to do business with Coca-Cola. Needless to say, it sold out. And that dinner was the first integrated dinner in the city of Atlanta with white people and black people. The point I'm making is that the political community and the civic community has handled issues of race and class, I believe, better than every other city in the South. The last data point I would make is this. Ivan Allen testified in favor of the Civil Rights Act for John F. Kennedy in '62 when he was mayor of Atlanta. It basically ended his political career in the South. We also had a governor named Carl Sanders. At the exact same time, Birmingham, which had a bigger economy because of the steel industry, had Bull Connor and a man named George Wallace. Today, the metro Atlanta economy is 3 times the size of Birmingham's. I think that there is a big message in that. If you want to be in the future business, you need an economy that is big, bold, open, and embracing of all people. And I think if anybody looks at the 1955 through 65 data on Atlanta and the 1955 through 65 data on Birmingham, without being insensitive to our friends in Birmingham, the numbers say that you're going to be better off if the door is as open, as wide as it possibly can be. Back then, it was race. Today, it's immigration. It's sexual orientation. It's making sure women involved. You're going to see a woman named Thea Washington Smith later today who launched our Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative. She took 15 startup businesses, and out of the 15 startup businesses, 9 of them have already hired their first employee. 1 has passed the $1 million threshold. And for 15 months, that women's incubator has women who get to work as a collective in an office that the city fully subsidized and paid for. She's done a terrific job. But you've got to be working on multiple layers. I call it the politics of the soft and the hard.
Well, and you've got some folks in the state pushing this religious liberty legislation. How do you deal with that? How do you balance it? Because I know on the one hand, the state's trying to compete to get Amazon, even willing to make a new town called Amazon, Georgia.
Yes.
I think that's going a bit far myself, but to each his own. But Amazon, Georgia is not likely to move into a place if that's a strong movement. My guess would be because they would see that as an inhibitor to the a significant number of the talented folks they want to bring in. So, what is your view on that, and how much of a concern should that be to those of us listening today? To how Georgia's future is going to look?
I think that's where the partnership between myself and the governor come in. For 4 years, the city of Atlanta has had a perfect score on the HRC index regarding how we feel about gay and lesbian.
This is Human
Rights Campaign Index. And Nathan Deal vetoed the last RFRA bill. And so I think your leaders are the ones who should be leading on this issue. And while we're in a political season with a bunch of folks running for governor, I am highly confident that we would never pass a RFRA bill in the state of Georgia. And I just think that you have to give some credit to a governor who in the Deep South had the courage to stand up and in a full-throated voice explain why what other people were doing with their life had nothing to do with his relationship with he and his wife. Now that's easy in a crowd like this, but you go to South Georgia and you say the same thing. And I think that we should get credit for that. The data for the city of Atlanta regarding Amazon is all going to be terrific because of great schools and universities. In about 15 days, Emory University and the CDC are annexing into the city of Atlanta. Georgia Tech's already in the city of Atlanta. Georgia State University is the largest public college in the state. For diversity, you've got Morehouse, Spelman, Clark Atlanta University. So I'm going to tell you, we're going to compete with all of our hearts for Amazon. And out of the 23 businesses we've gone after, we've won 18. And when we get in a room and tell our story, I think it's a pretty compelling story.
Before I go to the audience for a few minutes, I told you last night I walked around the inner city around.
No, you ran last night.
Yeah, I ran, but then I walked around after. After I ran, I went to get some beers, and stopped in a couple places. And I met a lot of young people. I met young people that were involved in tech companies, IT. They loved. I didn't tell them who I was. I just sort of was interested in the vibe, and the vibe is very. I've lost track of days, but it's like Wednesday night last night, right? So it was a fun night. People were enjoying downtown. That didn't used to be the case in Atlanta, and I'm interested in, you seem cool. Where do you hang out?
No, I move around. So when I go home, I try to stop at 3 places in different parts of the city going home. There's a place called Gio's Pizza. If y'all want some pizza, it's got the best pizza in America. There's a place called Marcel's on the west side of the city. If you're really feeling formal, you go to this place called Bones. If you want wonderful fish, you go to Kima. If you want amazing soul food and fried chicken, you go to Busy Bees on MLK.
But young folks are here. They like the city. They're hanging out. They feel safe. How did you move that needle? Just real short form. How did you make it? How did you attract and seduce young people back into the city? Because
there's a book by Michael Barber that says Instruction to Deliver. We focused on the fundamentals in the worst of time. We did the basics so that the private sector and folks felt good here. We cut crime by 37%. We're on path this year to have the lowest number of murders in 50 years. So people feel like I can hang out. Nobody's going to hit me over the head. We haven't raised property taxes. So people feel like this is affordable. I can bring and build my dreams. We haven't raised water rates. We started an anti-displacement initiative to address gentrification. I got a group of CEOs in the room and said, people are really feeling anxious about all of these young people moving in next door to them. We identified all of the people in Vine City and English Avenue that own their home, and for 20 years, they're not going to see their property taxes rise. We raise that money in the private sector, but it allows people to breathe and feel like they're not being pushed out as a result of the success we're having. I love my job.
Well, I can tell they ought to change the rules and give you another term, but I mean, that's enough for me in my editorializing. Let's take questions or comments from the audience. The floor for your mayor. You've got a question, Deborah. I know you do. Yeah, right up here in front. Deborah has a question. I knew I could tell it. You winked. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, thank you. My question is about the transit in Atlanta, the traffic. It's
Yes.
like,
Yep.
I live in McDonough, but
Yeah.
we want to do things in Atlanta.
Yes.
But you have to leave at crazy hours because traffic is just unreal and there's no transportation.
And I knew there was going to be a
out.
tough question
Yeah,
for you.
there's
No, I love it.
transportation
Yeah.
out Where I am, about the time I get to the closest station, I might as well drive in. So it's things in Atlanta that people, and young people, I have young adults that live with me,
Yes.
they want to do things in Atlanta, but it's just, you can't get here to do things.
So here's what happens, and hopefully you'll start feeling it soon. Governor Deal passed a $1 billion tax increase that's going in the road and arterial improvements. It's in a totally separate line item. So we're building and improving our arterials as quickly as possible. On November 8th, we passed the largest expansion of MARTA in its history. So it's a $2.6 billion expansion, which is when matched will be about $5 billion. We're building a line, for example, to Emory University that's going to connect the Emory University and CDC corridor by rail. So you're going to see a huge expansion of transit and an increase in mobility, and we're spending money on those efforts as fast as you can do it responsibly. But you should start feeling it soon, and I would just love if you would get a place in Atlanta, too.
He'll help you right after. He'll help line you up. Mayor, right here. Yeah, go ahead. Quick question, quick answer. I got one more for you.
All
Yes.
right.
Quick, if the mayor could speak a little.
Tell us who you are.
Oh, my name's Nancy Cato from Georgia State University.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear from you a little bit about Atlanta's efforts and what you've just done with energy independence and sustainable energy. And
Thank you.
addressing
Absolutely. We're going clean energy by 2035. We're the #1 city in the United States of America as a part of the Better Buildings Challenge. We've had 110 million square feet of private sector business owners raise their hand and say we're going to reduce our energy by 20% by the year 2020. We're 13% there. The city of Atlanta has already met 20% water reduction goals. We passed a sustainability ordinance that requires every building 25,000 square feet or more to report their energy efficiency findings publicly. I'm dropping a bill next week that's going to require all new apartment owners to set aside 20% of parking for EV vehicles. We're also passing an ordinance that says every new house in the city of Atlanta is going to have EV charging. So we're moving.
I want you all to fact check that.
Please do.
Later, so.
I live for fact checks.
Mayor, last question, and it is somewhat of a serious one.
Yes.
A lot of cities right now, you mentioned policing and that you've done such a good job with that. I know you've expanded the police force by 900 people. Do you have a problem here in this town with what would be considered police brutality? You have killings that many people have been raising questions around, questions of race, unfairness, inequity, over-incarceration. And I'm just interested, in your formula of dealing with a police chief here, is there something that's going right that we could learn from in other parts of the country? Or do you think you have big problems?
First of all, every mayor in America has a problem because on any given night, you can have an incident that requires review and scrutiny because everyone is human. We had 1 million officer interactions last year, more than 1 million interactions between our police department and the public, and guns were fired less than 14 times. And whenever guns are fired, the review of that is outsourced to the GBI. And so I think all of the credit goes to our command staff. And unfortunately, we have been able to avoid situations of controversy because we've been completely transparent and we've dealt with it in a decisive fashion, which I think is really what you have to do. The bigger challenge for any mayor in America and any leader in cities is that something in another city, Steve, can trigger an event with 15,000 people in your city. So during July of last year, I had 15,000 people protesting in downtown Atlanta, but they weren't protesting something we did. They were protesting the officer shootings in Minneapolis and in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Right.
And so I had almost every one of my police officers in situations that were very delicate. And so on any given day, a protest can occur from 1,000 to 2,000 people that puts the national and global reputation of your city at risk. And because we're the home of CNN, you bet your bippy it's going to be covered.
Well, you stay in touch when you're down in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Kasim Reed, thank you so much.
Steve, thank you. Grateful. Bye-bye.
For our conversation about redefining education, please welcome Bud Peterson, the president of Georgia Tech, and Gretchen Corbin, the commissioner of the Technical College System of Georgia. Here to lead the conversation, please welcome the Atlantic Senior Associate Editor, Jillian White.
No, great. That was fantastic. Really great questions.
Always.
Great questions. Anything I can ever do for you, let me know.
What those jobs look like, how industries are changing.
How was that?
Guys, let me know if you
Like
can't
that?
hear me.
Was I too tough on him?
So what we want to talk about first is preparing workers for those jobs. You know, this conversation is really inextricable from the conversation about education. If there are workers who are prepared to take the jobs, who have the skills, the training, the education to take the jobs in the future looks pretty bleak. So that's where we want to start the conversation. I'm wondering, and I posed this to a group of people last night, and they had very different answers. What do you think the skills of the future are? What are the necessities for new workers, and where should they be getting those skills?
Creativity, change factors, being able to move on a dime, whether that's a company or an individual. So probably the greatest characteristic for a young person who is looking at their career over 30 years, I would say would be creativity, talent, education, and the ability to be excited about change. Because we know over a young person's career, they're going to go into many different pieces of their career. And so to be able to change, to be able to be excited about that, and to be lifelong learners so that they know that they are going to be skilled for that next position, I think are some very important components for the next workforce.
President Peterson?
So I think probably the thing I'd add is adaptability. To try to envision the work environment 20 or 30 years from now and understand what type of work environment these young people that are graduating from college today will be experiencing halfway through their career is really a big challenge. If you think about these devices that just came on the market 10 years ago, and you think about how they changed our lives, and then think about what are the advances that are going to happen in the next 20 years. So I think the opportunity, the ability of young people to be adaptable, to be flexible in their career paths. There's statistics that indicate that 65% of the children that are entering primary school today will be employed in jobs that don't exist today when they graduate from college. That's a scary thought.
Yeah. So you guys talked about two things, lifelong learning and adaptability. And I'm wondering if you think the current educational system is well suited to prepare people for both of those. I know a lot of people think I go to school up through high school, then I make the decision about whether or not I can or want to go to college or some other form of post-secondary education. I pick a career, and for a lot of people, that's it, unless they choose to get an advanced degree or choose to go back to school for some other reason. So talk to me about how the current educational system is structured and whether it's adequate for those characteristics, adaptability and lifelong learning.
So I think from a baseline perspective, we're probably in pretty good shape in terms of fundamental education of our young people. But what we're going to see is increasing need for continuing education. A college degree, a technical college degree, is no longer going to last for your entire lifetime. We started an online master's program in computer science. It's a program that for under $7,000, students can get a master's degree in computer science. We have 6,000 students enrolled in that program today. We'll provide or supply 8% of the masters of science in computer science in the country this year. And the people that are taking that degree, that are pursuing that degree, have college degrees. They have bachelor's degrees in computer science or electrical engineering, some form of science. And when we first started the program, We had about 250 students in the first cohort. 12 of them had PhDs. And they wanted to go back and get some sort of continuing education, some retraining so that they could meet the needs of the workforce today.
Jillian, you asked about adaptability, and I
Yeah.
speak on behalf of the Technical College System of Georgia. We are 22 colleges strong. We have about 85 campuses around Georgia, and adaptability is pretty much our number 2 piece after workforce development being our top mission. It's very interesting. In this room today, you have employers who we know and who know workforce development is so very important. We have board members, we have a former commissioner in here, and what they will all tell you about every technical college system or every technical college is the responsibility is to listen to companies. What are they going to need 5, 10 years down the road, and how do we make sure our curriculum is in alignment with those companies and that workforce development need? And so we have a board meeting today. We have a board member in the audience, yes, and others represented here today. And they are right now talking about the technical education programs within our colleges. Are they exactly what they need to be? Do any of them need to be changed? Do they need to be advanced? And how do we do those? And we turn those around monthly. So in regards to being adaptable and being flexible, that's what the Technical College System of Georgia prides ourselves on.
And on the topic of adaptability, you guys have a program that is tailored towards reskilling, correct? And this was one of the things that I've been talking to people about a lot. It's not just preparing the next generation of workers, right? It's helping the generation of workers who are working now to prepare themselves for all of the ways that the job market is going to change. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing on that front?
Every college has a vice president of economic development who's responsible to go out to their local companies and ask, what do you need? Are you putting in a new line? And this is the exciting part. So let's say I'm working there and I'm mid through my career and someone's about to put in a new line of technology that I'm not necessarily comfortable with. It's our responsibility at the technical colleges to go out and do retraining for those employees so that they can be reskilled and go into that new line and continue their careers. So we do a lot of retraining through contract training at our colleges. But I look out to Roger Brown in the audience, and I obviously cheer about Quick Start. Quick Start is our training program for economic development. When we have new companies come into Georgia, we have just been named for the 8th year, the #1 economic development workforce training program in the nation for 8 years running. And that is really in partnership with our Department of Economic Development through Governor Dill to make sure that we have a training program specific for Georgia companies who are growing with jobs or new companies that are locating here. So the companies that the mayor mentioned earlier, we work with those companies to make sure that their employees are ready to be their skilled workforce day one of production or day one of operations for a headquarters.
Yeah. President Peterson, a lot of people think about manufacturing as a dying industry. That's the thing that we hear over and over again. You guys are actively trying to work on innovating that sector, bringing more technology to that sector, and producing the workers who would be skilled at going into that sector. Can you talk a little bit about what it takes to put together a program like that?
Sure, and this is one of the areas where we've got a great partnership with the technical college system to look at manufacturing. People think about manufacturing and they have the kind of the 3 Ds. It's dumb, dirty, and dying. The reality is manufacturing is increasing in a whole host of areas. It is an exciting area. We're working with the technical colleges, our summer programs. We've got a number of summer programs through Seismic, which is kind of our outreach for middle school kids to help them understand what the job opportunities are in manufacturing. In the Griffin Spalding School District, we have 4 3D printers that are in the middle schools there where students can learn about advanced manufacturing and additive manufacturing and some of the exciting things that are happening there. And we just recently announced, or it was announced that we received a $20 million grant from the National Science Foundation for an engineering research center in cell-based manufacturing. This is $20 million for the first phase. There's a second phase that's $20 million. Bernie Marcus committed $16 million gift to help support that initiative. And so this is, when you think about cell manufacturing, sometimes it's a little hard to understand. But this is, as you are looking at cell replacement therapy, you can't grow these cells in a petri dish. Today there's no large-scale manufacturing processes available for growing cells for replacement tissue, for cartilage and those types of things, and no way to measure the quality of those cells. So that's what's going on. It's a partnership with the Technical College System, the University of Georgia, Georgia State, and a number of companies here. Very excited about doing that. So there's some really exciting things going on in manufacturing. Again, people have a tendency to think of automobile manufacturing where the robots are spot welding, but there's a whole host of areas that are very, very exciting.
Yeah. When we think about lifelong learning and when we think about retraining and getting skills after you've already been in the workforce, the conversation about credentialing comes up quite a bit. And I'm wondering, one, how industry partners are responding to those credentials, and two, if getting different skills, if being retrained is worth it without a credential.
So I think the answer is absolutely. I'm not sure that employers are as interested these days in what the credentials are as they are in terms of the skill set. They're more interested to understand what are the skill set that folks have, what is the retraining that they need or that they can participate in. We see our professional education, the unit within Georgia Tech in professional and distance education is growing very, very fast. 45,000 students taking various courses, some degree programs, but a lot of it's just coursework so that people can get additional skills. I mentioned this online masters. It was interesting. We had some overachievers, I guess, that graduated a little early, 8 students that graduated in the first group in that program. 4 of them were from AT&T. They helped to actually support the program, and I was meeting with Randall Stevenson down in Plano, the CEO, and he asked how it was going, and I said, it's going really well. What do you think? And he had 4 of the first 8 graduates were AT&T employees. And I said that what we had to do was to try to help people understand what the career path is after they completed this degree. And it was kind of funny because I said nobody gets an MBA so they can keep the same job. Mm-hmm. And he kind of laughed a little bit and looked at the guy next to him, Bill Blaze, who was our coordinator, the person that helps connect with AT&T. And they had a young woman who had been in this program, and she had just sent Randall an email about 3 days before I got there saying that she was taking a job somewhere else. And so what we're seeing is people experience, gain experience, get additional learning, participate in additional learning opportunities, get additional education. Companies have to identify what the path forward is for those individuals. They have to have some sort of career ladder so that they can stay at the same company and still advance.
And how are you guys working with industry partners to kind of develop what that path is and then be able to use that in your curriculums?
So one of our best tools are our apprenticeships. Mm-hmm. And we are working very closely with local industry to make sure that we are doing apprenticeships. We do this in conjunction with the Department of Economic Development, their workforce division, in a Work Smart program where the student obviously is going to college, receiving a certificate, degree, or diploma, also having the opportunity to go to work at the same time and earn money and understand what the workforce is like and what their career can be like. We find we're also working with the German American Chamber of Commerce with also a certification through the German American Chamber. And what we find is when we can get students, and it's kind of, I'll always say to a company, whether you need a German American Chamber of Commerce certificate, a Department of Labor certificate, an internship, a co-op like Georgia Tech has been so successful at for decades, the Technical College System of Georgia wants to partner with you, because when we see a student inside a company and they are able to understand how their education relates to the job they are going to do, the money they are going to make, the house they are then going to purchase, it's just incredible. Georgia has done an incredible job, and Mayor Reed was so kind in complimenting Governor Dill, and it's been so fun watching them, hasn't it? Because they are an incredible partnership. Governor Dill's done some incredible things in education, and I will say from the Technical College System of Georgia's perspective, the most incredible has been his ability to say, for our high schoolers, you can access college credit. And so there's been a college and university component for our high school students, but through that, it's also brought students through apprenticeships into our Georgia companies. The coolest guy I've met so far has been a young gentleman in Noonan, and his name is Cooper Goldbeck. And he decided, he was with West Georgia Technical College, which is a good partner of Georgia Tech also. He wanted to be a part of an apprenticeship. We connected him with Grinzenbach, which is a great company out of Germany that the Department of Economic Development had worked with. And he started working as a welder there. And he started making money. He very quickly got on their health plan. He very quickly started understanding that he needed to save for a house. And this guy's not even graduated from high school yet. He then decided that he wanted a 401k plan. That was the one piece that the company couldn't figure out for him. And so he said, no problem, I just went to the bank and I did some saving plans. But more importantly, the young man said to me, what I realized was when I walked into the company, Grinzenbach is a great company that does true projects for manufacturers. So one day they may be doing huge welding components. The next day it may be an automotive component. The next day it may be a paint component. And he said, I realized to be successful long-term in this company, I needed to be valuable in each area of the company. So when a project came in, they said, Cooper's our guy. Yeah. And so when you get a student into a company, whether it's like that in manufacturing or whether it's with Georgia Power, who I see in the area, and we're talking about nuclear engineering technology or how to be in a headquarters and into leadership, when you get a student into a company, they very quickly put two and two together of what does that education, what does that master's, what does that certificate mean, and which one do I need to go for, or which one do I want to go for to then go back to the employer and say, guess what, I did it. And you know what? Sometimes the employer hasn't had that credential on their mind, but when the individual has earned it and they know to go back and say, look at this certificate that I am now certified to assist your company in, the HR department very quickly realizes that's talent and that's value, and we want to hire that individual, and we want these students to grow into Georgia's leaders in running our Georgia companies.
Right. I have a few more questions for our panel, but we do want to get you guys in on the conversation, so if you have questions, start thinking about them and condensing them down into very short bites. Thank you. So I want to follow up on some of the things the mayor said. And one of them is talking about why Atlanta specifically is such a great place to think about workforce development. You have all these wonderful schools, you have all of these major companies, and they have these great partnerships, and they're able to do all of these things. What are some of the lessons that you guys have learned about doing workforce development that you think are scalable or applicable or usable for other cities around the country?
So I've been in Kansas City, Houston, Denver, and Atlanta. And Atlanta's the first city that I've been in where the business community takes such an active role in the health and well-being of the city. I mean, when I first came, I was so impressed that when you go to the Metro Atlanta Chamber or the Georgia Chamber, the CEOs from these large Fortune 500 companies are actually there. They're at the table. They're invested in the city. They're working to try to make sure that the city can be successful. They understand that the success of the city will foster success of their companies. So that the engagement of the business community is just absolutely huge here in Atlanta in terms of helping foster an environment and a climate that attracts other businesses. And I think we've seen some success. The mayor said, I think the number he gave was they've gone after 25 companies and landed 18 of them. Gretchen and I both participate in the recruiting of some of those companies, and what we see is the other business leaders in the community come out to try to help attract these new businesses. And that means a lot to them. That type of climate, that type of environment is very, very beneficial. The other thing is Atlanta's got kind of all the pieces to the puzzle are here. Great diversity, a great city, a great airport, leadership in the business community, Fortune 500 companies, great educational institutions that span the whole spectrum. We are one of the largest education cities in the country. When you look at the number of students, post-high school, post-secondary school students that exist in the Metro Atlanta area, the number's huge. I think there's 56 different post-secondary educational institutions in the metro Atlanta region. And so we've got education, diversity, business leadership, just all the pieces are there to help make it successful.
Right. Are you in agreement with that, or?
I'm in agreement. My one word would be partnerships.
Yeah.
Who would, when you think about an individual who's running a university, one of the greatest universities in the world, might I say. Can you tell I've been in global commerce? And when I travel around the world, they say Atlanta, Coca-Cola, CNN, Hartsfield-Jackson, and Georgia Tech. So when you look at the president of Georgia Tech working with the commissioner of the Technical College System of Georgia, these are partnerships, whether it's in education, business, we are all together. You asked what would be scalable for other communities. Continue in the partnership that is needed for the day.
Right. I'm going to take some audience questions. I think I see two right back there. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. All right. Hi, my name is Jeffrey Martin, and I'm a team member here at Honor Code here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I have a quick question in terms of knowing that you all do a lot of the workforce development work in post-secondary. How are you seeing this type of, how are you looking at how K-12 schools are playing a role into developing our future workforce?
So again, I mentioned Seismic. This is a center that we have that focuses on primarily middle school. We have programs that start with rising second graders and goes through eighth grade, the Horizons program. So we have some elementary school kids and kids beyond middle school, but primarily focused on middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade young people. Bring them on campus. There's about 75 programs that we offer in the summer where these young people can come onto campus and learn about science and technology, engineering and math, and understand that it's not a whole bunch of old white guys in short-sleeved white shirts with skinny black ties and horn-rimmed glasses, that it can be exciting. And those programs are, I think, one of the reasons that we're seeing such a large increase in the diversity of our incoming freshman class, and in particularly the growth in women. We've gone from under 30% in the freshman class, the females in the freshman class, to 43% in this year's freshman class. And I think to a large degree it's because of these summer programs that we have where we work with the middle school kids. We work with the middle school and elementary school teachers. They come in, learn about some of the new technologies. They go back to their schools and can take that information. We work with them on developing laboratory experiments, and that is having a big influence and a big impact on the quality of the students that we're able to attract from within Georgia to Georgia Tech.
So Jillian, may I grab this
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Because this is one of the most exciting things that I have seen happen in Georgia in a very long time. Listen to this number, 21,000. 21,000 high school students are studying with our colleges today. Through dual enrollment, through the legislature and Governor Dill's work, we have the ability now for our high school students to go to college during their high school day, not doing double work, during their high school day. It counts towards their high school credit and their college credit, absolutely free, in dual enrollment. We have seen some school systems on the local level say all of our students should be engaged, or the majority, and then we have seen some that are still trying to figure this out. These students, these high school students, have the ability to do technical programs with us, to do general education, their math and sciences with us, with our university partners. But all of our 9th through 12th graders have the opportunity in Georgia to participate in dual enrollment. So what does that mean? It means high school students are getting engaged in college and university credit earlier. We hope that this provides us the ability to get these students into our Georgia companies' hands 2 years earlier, where they're coming straight out of the technical college system into our Georgia employers, or they're going on for their masters and their doctorates, and they're coming out. We still hope that they'll be 2 years a little younger and right into the workforce. So through dual enrollment, also through our college and career academies, which we are very excited about, we are engaging Georgia high schoolers better than we ever have before. 21,000 high school students will be in our colleges and universities today.
So I want to piggyback on that just a little bit, because I'm a big fan too. This dual enrollment program is spectacular. We have 2 freshmen at Georgia Tech this fall that graduated from Atlanta Metro with their associate degree before they graduated from high school. So that the high school graduation was a couple of weeks after Atlanta Metro. So we've got 2 freshmen that came in. They took 2 full years, got an associate's degree. They come into Georgia Tech, enter as juniors, and the cost of that was minimal, if any at all. And these young people are going to be able to come to Georgia Tech, graduate in 2 or 3 years, probably go on to graduate school perhaps, but this is a great, great program, and just kudos to the mayor, the governor for their partnership and helping this work. It's a statewide program and huge step forward for Georgia.
All right, and I think we want to take another question if we can. One right over there.
Good morning, thank you. Catherine Bruni with SunTrust Bank and Georgia Tech grad. Go Jackets. So there's a lot of research out there around loss of productivity in organizations due to things like financial stress, health issues, and so on. Is it the responsibility of universities to help with some of these life skills, and if so, what are we doing in that space?
Yeah, I mean, the expectations for universities seem to continue to grow. 25 years ago, universities educated people for jobs. Today, we're more focused on trying to educate young people for careers, to try to help them understand what those careers are. And that career education occurs not just in terms of technical skills and technical knowledge, but in terms of life skills. So we see what we're doing at places like Georgia Tech expanding to encompass many of the skills that they'll need in order to be successful. Gretchen talked about apprenticeships. Got a lot going on in co-op, which is a great opportunity for students to enter the workforce while they're still in college and then learn some of the job skills that they need that aren't based on calculus or physics or technical courses, but more of the social skills, the ability to work in teams. They bring those back and share that information with their classmates, and that can be very helpful.
Right. And we could talk about this all day, but I think we're going to put a pin in it right there. Everyone, join me in thanking our panel. Thank you.
Next, for a session titled Inclusive and Vibrant, please welcome Thea Washington Smith, the Executive Director of the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative for the City of Atlanta. Marty Wolf, the Chief Culture Officer at MailChimp. And Allison Stewart, Contributing Editor at The Atlantic.
About diversity and inclusion, you can think about age, you can think about socioeconomic status, you can think about whether your family arrived last year or came over on the Mayflower, and of course you can think about gender. So I want to start with you, Thea. The Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative the idea is to get more women into the workforce in Atlanta. Why entrepreneurship?
Absolutely. So we really
put your mic down a little bit. There.
Better?
Do we have Thea? Try again.
Better?
Better? No.
I always wanted to drive
Okay. You know, I'll start with you, Marty, while I figure out the...
Okay.
Marty, MailChimp. If you listen to the podcast Serial, you know what MailChimp is, but some people don't. So please explain what MailChimp is first.
Okay, we are a company located right here in Atlanta. We are a marketing automation platform. We are founder-led, privately owned. We have, and what we do as a company is we democratize cutting-edge marketing technology for small businesses, giving them the tools to help them grow. And we have 750 employees and 16 million customers around the world.
And when you join MailChimp, you don't really work for the first week. You have sort of an introduction and something called a Chimpanion.
You do have a Chimpanion, which is a buddy that kind of helps get you acclimated to our culture and at MailChimp. But not working for the first week is part of our onboarding program, which we feel is such an important part of starting at MailChimp, making sure that they understand how how different departments work, getting connected to other employees, and also it's a really important part of inclusion because you're starting and it's not just straight to work, but it's really getting to know the company and getting to know what we do.
Thea, is your mic on? Am I on? Still not on. You know what I'm going to ask you to do? I'm going to ask you to check the connection. Maybe that might be it. Let's hang tight. Oh, wow.
How about that? Better? You guys just don't like me.
And?
Better?
No.
Yay!
Whoa, yay! Okay, so back to my first question about women and entrepreneurship, why you're focusing on this.
Absolutely. So we really wanted to take a strong and intentional look in the city of Atlanta at who the next really robust job creators would be. Who would be the people who are not only starting, but keeping businesses in the city of Atlanta, and unequivocally those numbers pointed towards women. So Mayor Reed, who you heard speak earlier, talked about his vision a bit for the city and from an economic development standpoint, and women's entrepreneurship really factored into that. And so he often talks about how when he first was elected mayor, he would bring this idea to light and talk about it with the budget folks at City Hall, and they would push it back to him and say, you don't have enough money for that right now, let's focus on some other things. And so it finally came to light during his second term. We were able to really focus on what that would look like. And for us, what that looks like within the city of Atlanta is an incubator that supports 15 early stage women entrepreneurs, women who are very intentional in becoming job creators. And so we thought if we give these women an opportunity to grow those businesses and become those job creators in the city, all of us will be better for it. So we recently graduated a first class of those entrepreneurs. I think a few of them may be here with us today, as a matter of fact. And as he mentioned, we've seen 9 out of the 15 of those entrepreneurs either create an additional job opportunity or start or create a new one. And so for us, it makes sense because we know that talent cultivates talent. And we recognize these women as the talent, as the future of Atlanta's workforce, and we want to see them start and sustain those businesses in Atlanta and keep those jobs that they're creating in Atlanta as well.
What kind of businesses were in that first graduating class?
It was really industry diverse. We were almost evenly split between tech versus tech-enabled businesses. We had everything from, I think Tanya's here with us today. There she is. Hi, Tanya. Tanya is in construction. She is a robotics engineer, electrician by trade, and she is, I'm going to brag on you a little bit here, Tanya, one of them, I know you all will fact check, so keep me honest, but one of the first certified solar panel and roof installers in the Southeast. And we have, just a great group of entrepreneurs who were with us. Everything from, again, like what Tanya is doing in this non-traditional role to women who are developing their own technology and coding algorithms to a do-it-yourself branding expert who's out there, doing different brand activations using crafting to really monetize creative content for entrepreneurs.
Marty, Entrepreneur Magazine named MailChimp as having one of the best cultures. And we've been talking to a lot of CEOs. The CEO of WeWork mentioned how important culture was. The CEO of SoulCycle mentioned how important culture was. And I think for a lot of people, culture feels like a sort of a woo-woo, kumbaya term. But it's come to be very, very important in terms of keeping people and keeping companies vibrant. One, why is culture important to you? And 2, what do you think is unique about your culture that landed you on that list?
For us, culture, like you said, a lot of times people think about culture just as being something, a fun place to work or, perks. But for us, it's much more than that. It's about making sure that our employees feel engaged, that they are feeling engaged because they're feeling like they're making an impact in the work that they're doing, that they're growing, that they feel connected to our mission, that they feel not just our mission and how we're serving our customers, but that they feel connected to the community that we're serving around us in our corporate citizenship program. So my role is dedicated to that, and our team and leaders at the company really work hard to make sure employees are always feeling like they're engaged.
What's an example of something that you've implemented?
We have a lot of really great initiatives. We have one thing I think that really helps keep people engaged and feeling like they're growing is that we have an internal leadership program that is for all employees. It's soft skills that a lot of times people don't get in school. Effective communication, problem solving, influence without authority, those types of things. And we teach that it's a leadership program for everyone, not just managers. So employees really see that we're investing in them and their growth, and it's something that they can take even beyond MailChimp. And we also have an apprenticeship program where we're people that do not have a traditional background, the degree, can actually have an opportunity to try a new role and gain skills. And it's a 90-day program where they're able to move into a new role, and their current role, that position is saved for them. So if for some reason it doesn't work out, then they can go back into that role. But we've had a 100% success rate. We've had 23 people complete the program, and it's really helped bring more diverse backgrounds and experiences across teams. 23 out of 23 of the people completed the program, 9 of them have been women, and 7 have been people of color moving into technical positions. So it's been really successful.
Thea, when I thought about the entrepreneur program, I thought about something the director, Ava DuVernay, said. She directed Selma and Queen Sugar, and she's doing Wrinkle in Time now, and the movie 13th. And she said, you know, the glass ceiling is such an aggressive and violent term, and I've decided not to knock on someone else's door. I've decided to build my own house. And she thinks that's really the future. What is it about entrepreneurship you think really helps women move forward?
Well, I think what is really exciting to us when we think about entrepreneurship as a tool for economic mobility for women is it really allows you this opportunity to be the architect of your own success. You have women, particularly in our case at WE, who are solving problems. They are solving challenges. They have created and are scaling businesses that are specifically focused on addressing problems in the market and offering solutions to them. And so if you think about what that looks like, it's very difficult to explain without seeing it, but for us at WE, you really have a space, this open, collaborative, synergistic space where you have 15 businesses all exclusive of one another. They're not doing the same thing. They're all industry diverse. But what you've done is create this collective where they can come together and use one another as these organic sounding boards. And they're really working together to think about how are we solving these problems? How are we scaling these business? And then you're giving them a backdrop to really bring some robust and ambitious ideas to task and say, you know what, and what it sounds like, what the soundtrack for me is, you know what, you should absolutely pursue that. You know, Tanya, for instance, is going into business with another entrepreneur who she met through WE and creating another joint venture opportunity that they likely would have never had an opportunity to create had their paths not intersected at WE. So we're really just about, as Marty talks about, we're about creating, my goal is to create a sense of culture within WE where you feel like you not only belong, but that you are contributing value to this culture by way of you being here and by way of you bringing those problem-solving businesses to our space.
I think a lot of leaders, I don't think there's a leader out there who would say, no, I don't want to be inclusive and not have diversity in my company. But a lot of people don't know how to go about it. What have you both learned about the how of doing this, Marty?
What we've learned is really that leadership needs to be involved. It needs to start there. It's something that we've always cared about to create an inclusive workplace. But as we've grown, we've really had to be more intentional about it. We have to make sure leadership's involved and that we're really listening to our employees. And one thing that has helped us is just those open conversations and providing a safe space for that. Last year we had, in the last year we've had a couple of open forums, one following all of the police shootings last summer, and then recently Charlottesville. And when things like that come up, really bringing people together and having an opportunity to talk about it. And that has helped so much with continued conversations. Employee resource groups have formed out of having these open forums. So I think that that's, you know, really helpful when you just, maybe you don't always know how to solve it, you don't have all the answers, but you're vulnerable and you just, you know, jump in and provide that space.
What do you think, Thea?
I think what we found at WE is, that I've heard this fact several times, or this data point, that worker productivity is about 25% mandatory, right? It's sort of what you have to do in your job. The other 75% is really around how you feel about coming to work, how you feel about your boss, and how you feel about where you work. And so what we really aim to create is a space where these 15 women, these 15 job-creating, employing, company-building entrepreneurs are able to be the sorts of bosses, and create this sort of environment and this sort of culture where they are able to welcome a productive workforce for them that realizes and understands that they are part of that investment in that culture and in that company. So they no longer just see themselves as necessarily an appendage to the company. They recognize themselves as really being a part of the value of that company. And when you're working with entrepreneurs, often, especially startups, you know, where these teams are small but building, every employee matters, right? You don't really have the opportunity to make a bad hire. You have to really work to get that right. And so we see our entrepreneurs being very intentional about hiring talent and skill necessarily over just job title or what's on resume. And so I think that's where we tend to focus on making sure we give them a space to feel like they are empowered to hire based on talent and again contribute to a problem-solving environment.
You know, the world is so crazy now, it's almost unrealistic to think that people aren't going to bring that into the job. You have to be almost a robot or a super person to be able to do that. In terms of making workplaces more inclusive, how and what can companies do to balance all that's happening in the world with the workplace, Marty?
I think that providing that space to talk about it is so important, that we really try to make sure that our managers that they know how important it is, that they have to prioritize that when they're meeting with their employees in one-on-ones on a regular basis. It's not just about a status check-in, but it's about how are you doing? You know, there's so many things happening and it affects people so differently. And being productive, it is so hard to be productive at work if you are worrying about everything that's going on around you. So I think just really acknowledging what's going on and talking about it, I think really provides that safe space and makes workers more productive.
What do you think have been the major barriers to companies being more inclusive and having more diverse workforce?
I think Marty and I were talking about this just a bit earlier and last night, in fact, is that often you have situations where, because historically we have done things in a certain way, because there have been these sort of boxes where you have had to place employees and sort of check the box and ensure that they meet all of those criteria before you are even able to have a conversation with them. That has really created barriers for people to come to work, for people to run businesses and feel like they are accepted, they are acknowledged exactly for who they are. And so again, I think to her point, you have to really strip away a lot of those preconceived notions and ideas about what talent looks like. I think a lot of it has to do with tapping into talent in places where we don't often find it, because with that comes an undercurrent of, you know what, I'm not only accepting and celebrating this unique type of talent, I'm accepting and celebrating the whole person who comes with that.
When you say places where people don't often look for it, what do you mean exactly?
Well, for us, for instance, in the city of Atlanta, and thinking about women's entrepreneurship, you know, we are a completely community-facing initiative. We go through a competitive process to select the 15 entrepreneurs who we support. And for us, that means really being diligent about tapping into every part of the city. We were just talking about this. Looking for, in a very intentional way, people who don't even identify as being entrepreneurs, just stripping away that sort of elitist title that the word is given and saying you are a problem solver. I was sharing with Marty, one of our entrepreneurs, who for quite some time would just say to me, you know what, I'm just really a retired teacher who's created a STEAM program. You are an entrepreneur. You are solving a problem in your community. And so for us, it's really looking beyond just sort of that low-hanging fruit, if you will, looking beyond just certain areas of the city and tapping into talent and intersecting them with that opportunity so that they have the best opportunity to be successful.
I'm going to ask one more question and then throw them out to the audience if you have any questions. I'm curious if you feel like some of this shift has to do with millennials. There's there's an enormous amount of them, and they have a really different way of thinking about work.
Yeah.
Especially for you, Marty.
Yeah, we're probably 80% millennials, and it definitely does, and I think that they are such a positive force in driving fulfillment, transparency, communication, and I mean, it took me a while to adjust because I'm older, and you know, but it's everybody, the things that they push for, everybody wants those things. Everybody wants to feel like they're making an impact, that they want transparency, that they want to feel connected to their community. Those things are so important to everyone, and I think that millennials are a really positive force in driving that.
Something else we touched on a bit is how, and I think this is very evident with the millennials we work with, they want to give back. They want to feel like there is absolutely a transactional opportunity in the best way possible for them to be on the receiving end, but also the giving end of creating value. And so for us and at We, it really looks like I've had so many conversations with some of our millennials where they will just walk into my office and say, what can I do? How can I help? Is there a group that we can get in here? Are there any other kids, youth groups that we're working with who will be coming to We? I want to be a part of that experience. So to her point, I think it's really helping to lend value to what they are doing above and beyond just what their title may be, and focusing more on the whole person and the development of what that filling up of their bucket looks like through those experiences.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I see someone right here.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. Good morning. Yes. I'm Betsy Epps. I work for Fulton County School System. I'm the Visual Art and Media Arts Coordinator. And so this might take a little wind out of some of our sails, but according to the Equal Opportunity Project in the Southeast, Atlanta and Charlotte have the lowest probability of upward mobility in the country, and the chance of a child in Atlanta whose parents are in the lowest quintile of income has less than 5% chance of reaching the top income of in his or her lifetime. And so the challenge for us as educators, this problem can't be solved just by K-12 and cradle to college and tech school pipeline. What can we do to develop the infrastructure to improve the opportunities for everyone in Atlanta?
We actually had a bit of conversation around this last night, and something I've said often is I think one of the first things we need to do is think differently about how we are talking to children, in this case with you, about the workforce. And I think the idea of being, from my lens, just helping children think from an entrepreneurial mindset. So that may even just be a shift in the conversation from what do you want to be when you grow up to what problems do you want to solve? What are you interested in being a part of? I think that has a lot there's a lot of substance in that, in helping us think differently about that narrative. But certainly I think that what you just quoted is something we're very aware of here in Atlanta, that economic mobility and the lack of opportunity for certain parts of our city. And again, this is one of the main reasons why we initially founded We, was to think about the folks who are really at the catalyst of that economic change for us women, and giving them that opportunity to create these economic tools around entrepreneurship that will be empowered and supported in the city. I heard you mention WeWork, for instance. For us, that looks like an opportunity. When our 15 entrepreneurs graduate and move out of We, they go right to WeWork. We have an opportunity for them to extend not only the 15 months of complimentary space they had with us, so they're not worried about overhead costs, they're not worried about putting personal assets to getting office space. They now have an opportunity to continue that with the WeWork locations in the city of Atlanta. What that does specifically is it gives them more opportunity to put their capital into those businesses, to create those job opportunities, to employ someone, and to help do something to disrupt, in the way that we're doing it, those income inequality facts that are just, that are staggering, and that we do need to think more creatively, I think, about doing something about.
Do you have any other questions? The woman in the back. Leslie, hang on one second. We want to give you a microphone.
Good morning. My name is Leslie Grady with the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. And I just have to give kudos to Marty and to MailChimp. We just completed a pilot with them called Community College, where they brought 12 of their employees together to talk about this community, its issues, equity, to get exposed. And at least from the outside, it seemed like, when I think of these words, vibrant and inclusive, that was a group that really was able to dig in and be themselves. Marty, what, from your perspective, because you live with them, what was that experience like for you?
Hi, Leslie. It was such an amazing experience for our people, and we were so lucky that to partner with the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. But we had a really strong corporate citizenship program, but one thing where we saw an opportunity where we could make it better was to make sure that our employees felt really connected to what we were doing, that they really understood the why behind we were working with certain nonprofits or the challenges that they faced. And so having this program where Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta helped connect us with over 40 civic and nonprofit leaders in Atlanta, really understanding the challenges, it helped our employees become even more engaged and be able to, they were from across all different departments, and they were able to now educate and be ambassadors for our corporate citizenship program throughout the company.
One last quick question, because
sure.
we're out of time. These are both new initiatives. For businesses and companies that are legacy, have long histories, it's easy to start a new culture. What is one thing a piece of advice you would give to a legacy company or corporation that wants to be more diverse and more inclusive? One little thing they could do.
I think my one quickly would just be to think outside of the box.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds sort of cliche and something we hear often, but really you do have to get very creative and you have to be very non-traditional about how you are accessing, identifying, and then acquiring talent.
Yeah.
And think differently about what talent means and think differently about what that talent has to come equipped with to be a part of that team. I think once we do all of ourselves, we're making a better community for all of us when we think about our talent and we tap into it from different areas and different opportunities within our communities.
Yeah, just thinking differently and making sure that you're really engaging your employees. They are the best way that you can make change, and listening and learning from them.
Let's thank our panelists.
For a session produced by our underwriter, please welcome Jamie Marasotis, President and CEO of the Lumina Foundation, and Joan Lynch, the Chief Content and Programming Officer at Working Nation.
Good morning. Lumina Foundation is delighted to be here as an underwriter sponsoring this summit on the future of work. The future of work is very important to our efforts at Lumina Foundation. Lumina is the largest private foundation in the nation focused solely on post-high school learning. Our interests at Lumina Foundation are really in systemic change. What we're trying to do is to make learning opportunities available for all people beyond high school, because we see learning beyond high school as critical to lifelong success for all Americans. You know, this issue of learning for all and improving learning is really critical to meeting the nation's rising demand for talent. 2/3 of the jobs being created today require some form of post-high school learning, and yet we see increasing evidence of the fact that the connections between the worlds of learning and work are not well intertwined. Going forward, learning and work must be better connected to ensure our shared prosperity as a nation, and we are doing everything in our powers as a private foundation to make that happen. One of the things that we're doing is exciting new work with a partner, Working Nation. Working Nation is an innovative storytelling organization that takes an approach to helping people better understand this changing nature of work and the shift in the nature of work that's going on. And I'm joined by Joan Lynch, who's the Chief Content and Programming Officer at Working Nation. Joan's an award-winning journalist and producer, probably best known as the developer and overseer of ESPN's celebrated 30 for 30 series. So Joan, you're a master storyteller. You know how to spin a narrative. What's the narrative of work in America today?
What had surprised me coming into this, having left sports that were generally pretty exciting stories, is the story of work in the United States is the most interesting thing I've ever come into contact with, because almost any story that you tell about a human being in some way connects back to work. It connects back to their quality of life. It connects back to who they think they are, how they provide, and how they become an active member of the middle class in society. But in terms of how it's changing in terms of the rapid rate of change and how quickly people are having to learn new skills and find new ways to adapt in an environment that, quite frankly, is very different than it was 10 and 20 years ago.
So Carrier is a company that's been in the news in the last year, and you've spent some time with Carrier workers trying to understand where they are. Tell us a little bit about the Carrier story.
Sure. So we ended up sending in a director very shortly after the original announcement was made that made national press when the employees held up their cell phones and recorded when they were laid off. And we went in and we spent a lot of time with the Carrier workers, with the folks in City Hall, with the unions, and with the organizations that were brought in to bring in new programs to reskill some of these folks. And one of the things that I found to be the most interesting is that there are jobs in Indianapolis. There are good jobs in Indianapolis. With some retraining, these folks could move directly into them. But what was disturbing to us is that a large majority of people that we talked to said they were more comfortable with the idea of being unemployed than being retrained. And as we dug into that, because that is kind of jaw-dropping, as we dug into that, what they were really saying is the words education, training, technology, skills, they hear coding all the time when you have to learn something new. That scared them to the point where they said, I can't do it, I'm not ready for that. So it's great for storytellers like us to be able to say, if we change the dialogue and we change the story, we can say things like, do you like to play video games? You know, so many of the jobs of the future have changed and are technological in a fun way. And we've been able to, just through our work on the ground, get a lot of people into this idea that, wow, my community college offers that. I didn't realize it would be fun, and it would be interesting, and it wouldn't be like my 12th grade biology class.
So how do we make them lifelong learners? How do we actually flip the switch, help them understand? We heard in the prior panel the importance of lifelong learning here in Georgia. How do we make that possible for workers across the country? In the knowledge economy, the nature of work has fundamentally changed. People need to better understand that learning and work is not a sequential process, that in fact you learn and work in intervals throughout your life. So how do we help those workers, people like that, understand that lifelong learning is a part of what they're doing as workers?
Sure. I mean, I think it comes down to, when the mayor was here earlier, he was talking about the partnership that he has now with the governor and how they communicate. And perhaps if we think about it politically, maybe they shouldn't be, you don't expect them to, coming from different parties, but they did, and they did because they care about the people. So the collaboration between companies and educators and work, I go to a lot of these types of events with sometimes all educators, but the work, maybe the employers aren't there, or maybe some of the workers aren't there, but getting the dialogue going so that we can tell a worker, if they're about to lose their job, we can tell a student who's in 10th grade trying to decide where to go to school, or someone that just got out of college that is underemployed, here are the tools that you have that within your city. It sounds like Atlanta's doing a great job with this. But also to just keep encouraging them that just because you have a degree does not mean you won't need a credential down the line. And that's just going to make you more valuable.
So you think the credentials matter? You think that having a credential is important in this context?
I think it's absolutely important, and I think it's a way, in a lot of areas you're seeing people who are not necessarily getting pay raises, but they're going and they're getting new skills, and by doing that their self-confidence, we've seen this, we've been documenting this, they feel good about themselves, that they can learn something new, that they can go into their company and perhaps say, here's something that I saw going on and I added this class and here's this credential. I do believe that, as we like to say, it's not my line, but education is not a ladder anymore, it's a lattice. And it's different for all of us, depending on what experiences we've had, what jobs we want. And then perhaps, in the middle of a job that you wouldn't expect to be a manager, all of a sudden you are a manager. Well, then taking some classes on management or communication skills or those types of things, it's just gonna make you a stronger employee or a stronger employer.
One of the issues that we focus on at Lumina Foundation is competency-based learning, and this idea that you have to know and be able to do things in order to be able to receive those credentials. We think that increasingly the credentials that are awarded either by colleges or universities or really from any issuing body, a workplace-based learning context to direct-to-consumer context, should reflect competency. What kind of competencies do you think these people need to be successful as they move through that iteration of work and learning?
I think it can be industry by industry, and I think the community colleges and the businesses, one of the panels before us talked about having a very clear conversation about what are the jobs in this area, what are the needs, and and how can we then, as a community college or a college, four-year college, online school, provide them. But I think in general, that collaboration has to lay out for others. Here are the credentials that are going to be helpful for you in this particular field, instead of sort of this general, here, take these 5 classes and you'll be good in this field. Just, it doesn't work that way anymore.
One of the questions, and this came up a little bit in an earlier panel, is this question about equity and the fact that we need a more equitable learning context so that people who are actually learning and are able to apply that learning in work are treated fairly throughout the learning process. Tell us a little bit from your perspective as a storyteller about how we can tell the story about equity without it becoming a he said, she said, without it becoming an issue of these are issues that are either black or white. It seems to me that these are American issues,
that's right.
and that equity is an issue that should matter to all of us. How do we make sure that that gets transmitted into this learning and work conversation?
Well, that's why I think that Working Nation is such a great opportunity for us to do this, because when you put a human face on something, one of the stories that we're working on and have been for 2 years is the story of returning medics, Special Forces medics who went in without a college degree, get 10, 12 years in the military, $1 million worth of training, and as they come out, they don't get credit towards EMT school or nursing school. And there's a great need in this country for people in the healthcare field. And so as you start to put a face on that and you start to think about places like Las Vegas and what happened this week and healthcare providers and how we need people in this country that can respond, you can start to make that connection in your own brain about this person has a skill, perhaps with an extra credential, perhaps with something else. They should be in that place because we need them as a country. Same could be said for home health care workers and other positions. So telling it through a person and a character, I hope creates some change and some shift that can create change in life and in people's futures.
Yeah, I think your point, and I think we'll end here, is that you've got to put the human face on the fact that credential that somebody gets, there's a real person behind it.
That's right.
And that the credentials really are the currency of the knowledge economy. And as work changes, we need to make sure that those credentials change as well.
That's right.
Joan Lynch, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
For a conversation about retooling the workforce, please welcome the President and CEO of GE Appliances, Kevin Nolan. Here with the Atlantic's Washington editor-at-large, Steve Clemens.
Hey, everybody. So we're here to talk to GE Appliances CEO. You're huge. You make lots of stuff. You're a coat and tie guy. I am interested in what you're doing about the future of work. What's the coolest thing GE Appliances is doing right now?
Well, I would say there's a lot going on at GE Appliances. We've got...
Give us the coolest thing out of the lot.
The coolest thing is probably First Build, where we're doing some real interesting things on the edge of how do you bring innovation, how do you bring a new way of work into a kind of an old corporate culture.
Give us a snapshot of First Build.
So First Build is located on University of Louisville campus. It's a partnership that has come up, but it's a micro factory. So what First Build is, it is a complete business, but it contains a factory. So we do everything there from designing product, selling product, but most important, manufacturing.
So I want to give in the real company in GE Appliances, you're making stoves and refrigerators, and I mean, I assume you're making all of the stuff we know, of GE, bringing.
Hopefully, we all know about our
You're
great
making all that
appliances.
stuff, but then you have this side thing, First Build. So I want to explain to people, and it's all under GE Appliances.
That's right. That's right. So the side thing is we also make appliances, but it's a completely open space. We also have local artists making artwork. We have local entrepreneurs creating all kinds of different things. But we make some pretty cool stuff, like we have a new ice maker, Opal Ice. But what's interesting there is everything we create is kind of created with a community. It's created not with just our employees, it's created with people all over the world.
So how many of you know what that soft melting nugget ice is that you like to suck on? Raise your hands if you know what I'm talking about. You know what nugget ice is. Raise them big, be bold. I mean, wouldn't you like to have one of those in your own home? Right? Yeah, so you had an employee. I mean, do you wear suit and tie at First Build?
I actually don't wear this. This I had to pull the tag off. We actually don't
Take
wear
the
these.
tie off.
So I can.
I mean,
I'll loosen it.
You know,
right? We'll loosen the tie.
I think GE is cooler here. This is what I'm going to get at. Is that you? Yeah, take it off. Take it off.
Okay,
Here.
we'll do
Yeah.
that. We'll do it. So it actually feels much better now.
There you go. Yeah, I know. So we're going to get to the real story here. So you had an employee who says, "God, I love to suck on this nugget ice, and we ought to have one for the home, right?" And they built that. That's been a big seller.
That's
called
right.
Opal.
That's right. You know, at First Build, it's what we do is we try to go from idea to production in months. We started selling Opal before we ever actually engineered it. So we just went out there and started selling it, and all of a sudden we got a lot of orders. So we figured then we'd have to design and
So
make it.
this was an innovation from a worker, an employee, or a student. Someone inside your world said, "Hey, let's do this. Let's make it."
Yeah, I would say it's not even just that. It was an idea, but then it was a community effort to put this thing together and to figure out how to do it.
What are some of the other ideas you've had?
A real cool one is pizza. How many people like pizza? So we have a indoor pizza oven. If you want to cook real high-end pizza, you have to build an outdoor with flames, and you know it needs to get to 1,500 degrees. We figured out a way we can do that in your house. Sounds kind of crazy, so it doesn't have a door. It goes up to 1,500 degrees. It is safe, but that was all designed and thought of through First Build.
And what about the Spanish-speaking washer-dryer?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So it speaks many languages now, which is amazing. It was actually, there was a 14-year-old student that needed a science fair project that had, in Louisville, Kentucky, we do most of the Braille, so for the blind, there's a big community there. And he had done some projects, so he thought, for the blind, how do we make washers more accessible? So this kid came in, he was an amazing programmer, made this device that converts one of our appliances and allows it to talk. And we've actually gone into production. But it was an amazing place where a 14-year-old student so his science fair was pretty cool, right? It's a kid that's actually selling a device and having a real need. But I'd say that's some of the beauty of First Build too, allows things like that to happen.
Hasta la vista. You know, they get
yeah,
it going.
yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is you're the president and CEO of GE Appliances, and with all due respect, GE Appliances does not for me, it sort of represents the metaphor. If you were to kind of build 1 million dryers, you're not going to be the place that somebody can come and say, "Hey, you know, let's figure out how I can develop the perfect nugget ice home manufacturer." And I'm interested in whether that was a challenge for you culturally from being this giant juggernaut of manufacturing to trying to be sensitive to somebody's interesting idea.
Well, I'd say, you know, we do make millions of things, right? You know, and we are big on U.S. manufacturing. We've reshored a lot of manufacturing into the U.S. But we really saw the future of that. For that to be sustainable, you have to have innovation. I think you're going to see more customization coming. And also there's more technology that's coming in very quickly. So with all that, that's what created First Build. I think First Build was an experiment to see what can we do different. But it really is about how do we continue to bring innovation in the millions, right? And how do we bring good, productive jobs back into our manufacturing facilities? So I would say First Build is an experiment of a culture, but the whole thing we're doing now is we're bringing that culture back into what you might think of as an old 100-year-old company. We like to say we're a one-year-old startup. We're not a 100-year-old company.
You know, the Atlantic magazine is 160-year-old this week, so I like hanging out with other semi-elders that are still around. But one of the things that I think is interesting in this question, James Fallows, for those of you who get the Atlantic and you keep it at home on your shelves, which I hope you do, you go back to this cover story called Comeback, and GE Appliances was a very big part of that story about manufacturing coming back to the United States, and you were kind of the forefront of Jim's profile.
Yeah, so that was, I think it was around 2008, something around there, 2007. We were in the process, we put $800 million in Louisville, Kentucky in manufacturing. We brought a lot of manufacturing back from overseas. And that article was very timely because I think we were progressive. We ran into a lot of troubles post that article, I'd say. And some is me, I've worked overseas a lot. I've worked in manufacturing facilities all over the world. And I didn't understand the skill gap and the issues that we were going to walk into when we reinvested and we reshored. And post that, we really got into issues. Did we have the right skills? You know, I was using an analogy before. If you took a mechanic that was working on a car from the 70s and 80s,
Right.
if you brought them a car that's built today, they'll look at it, right? And I don't think, you know, where's the carburetor? And we kind of had that feeling because we had been outsourcing for years. And you look at our skilled trades, and this equipment that we bought was kind of like looking at a new car of, what do I do? How do I fix it? How do I work with it? So we ran into a lot of issues.
You told me about 3,000 new jobs into that. But you said that the profile, the footprint of how many people you actually had to hire to get to 3,000 was how many?
So we brought about 5,000 in because of attrition. There are all kinds of skill issues. You know, in other statistics, over the next 5 years, 40% of our skilled trades will retire. So if you look at this nation, we have a whole air generation that's going to retire. And what have we done to bring those skills back into the workforce? And the skills that they were trained on are much different. Right?
So what are you doing?
So we're doing a lot. I would say, you know, it's one we're leading, not just us, but the industry around Louisville, Kentucky. There's about 23 companies. We've created what we call FAME, which is an advanced manufacturing training. But it's very much industry-led, but government partnerships and university partnership. I think that's the secret. Is I do firmly believe industry needs the lead because we know what our problems are. We know what the skill set, we know the way work is going, and it's changing fast. I mean, every year you're seeing the pace of change. But then it's got to be supported through public policy, and it's got to be supported through universities.
How digitally adept are your people coming into the door as opposed to 5 years ago?
You know, I think it's the students coming out, they're much more digitally adept. But it's one where it's funny, you see kind of cross-training. They know things, but then at the same, just because you know how to use your smartphone doesn't know that, you know, you can run a $3 million piece of equipment on a factory floor that might have similar technology, but much different.
How many of you have been in a factory? Just interested? Wow.
That's
If I
pretty
were
good.
in New York or DC, there would be like 2 hands that went up. So this is a factory-aware audience. I'm very impressed. I have been, we were just talking, this been in a factory, but there used to be in communities around this country a stigma associated with manufacturing, that particularly grandparents, parents had worries about manufacturing being the false promise for their children and in a way kind of discouraging some children there. Do you deal with that at all? Do you see that? You know, I've talked to the governors of Ohio, of Pennsylvania, of Massachusetts, and said that, you know, manufacturing's new and different, but there still is a resistance out there in people going into these jobs.
So I'd say more than just seeing it, I've dealt with it myself personally. I grew up in Connecticut. You know, Connecticut, I was Stamford, Connecticut, was a manufacturing, my father's generation, everything seemed to be made between Bridgeport, Stamford. It all moved out. I went to University of Connecticut, wanted to get into manufacturing. I moved into GE at the time. That factory closed, you know, after I moved in. So I just saw, I had a view that manufacturing was gone from the U.S. And I think a lot of that is students have been told those jobs are going to go away. And as I've gone through my career, if you were to talk to me 20 years ago, I would be sitting here saying we need to be prepared, those jobs are going away. As I sit here today, I have 100% confidence those will be the jobs of the future. Those jobs are coming back to America in a strong, and they will come back year after year after year in a strong way.
Your facilities are expanding and growing?
They're expanding. The economics work. I mean, especially with new technology, you're going to want to manufacture locally. There's going to, and I go back to Connecticut all the time and tell people they don't believe there's manufacturing job. I say, come on out, I'll hire you. I have job openings. I mean, we have a skill gap. So the issue isn't the jobs coming. They're going to come, I'm completely convinced, and they'll be here for a long time. And I think that's what people didn't trust. Should I start a career that maybe in 5 years might vanish? And I really think that's not going to be the case.
One of the other astonishing things I just learned about your company I was unaware of is that while we know GE Appliances, your mothership is Haier Corporation from Shandong Province in China.
That's right. That's right.
And you know, I've written about the Chinese economy and Chinese investment around the world. And most Chinese investment in the world is bottom fishing, looking for assets that don't require significant new levels of investment, and usually it's kind of to drive their ability to kind of continue to produce washers and dryers in China that they export to the world. I haven't seen much investment like yours where they've come in and actually expanded in an area like manufacturing. Can you give us a quick snapshot of what that's like, and how's your Mandarin?
My Mandarin's a little weak. So we've been, for 13 months, about 14 months now, we were acquired by Haier. Haier is a big global company. We're now the largest appliance company in the world when you put G Appliances and Haier together. I've been in my role as CEO for 3 to 4 months. I guess it's 4 months now. Before that, I was CTO of appliances, but then became CTO of the global company. So first it was interesting where Haier made the acquisition. Typically you see they'll put people here. It actually was the opposite. I basically started working in Qingdao, China, trying to drive globally, how we could work from a technical standpoint. And they're very interesting, they're a very progressive company. And I'd say I hope this is what the future holds, because they are very bullish on manufacturing in the U.S. also. So a lot of people come in and say, hey, they're going to, be at us to reshore, and it's the opposite. They're actually working, how do we help train, how do we help develop our manufacturing skills to manufacture here. So I think that's another, bias that maybe we have that I think isn't reality, because it makes sense. When you look at things like appliances, you don't want to be shipping these things across the water. And the economics work, you need to serve. And I think you're going to find that more and more with manufacturing. Manufacturing is going to want to go back to being very local. And it used to be that way. Henry Ford and some made so that everyone thought scale mattered, but people want customized, they want products that are good for them. And I think Haier is very forward-thinking and seeing that trend and being very supportive of where we need to go.
Do they support you in things like First Build and understanding that part of having that creative edge is, because I honestly, knowing a lot of Chinese firms, I can't think of any of them that have a First Build-like operation.
Yeah, what was fascinating to me when the chairman came in, and I'll tell you the truth, I can bring a lot of people from GE into First Build and no one got it. And when the chairman came in, he got it right away. So it actually gave me a very warm feeling about what kind of company they were. But it is, I think, they're kind of on the leading edge of, I would say, companies in China right now, but they definitely got it.
So before I go to the audience, where can I get an Opal and a smart wine chiller and the precision cooktop?
So the Opal's easy. Go on. I think it's look opal.com, or we're now selling actually on Amazon.
Do you have like friends and family discounts?
Typically
probably
not.
editorially not allowed, but no, it's interesting. I mean, it is interesting to think about. I mean, I think any large organization has this challenge of how do you stay crisp, nimble, and also retain people, right? How do you keep people wanting to be in the space you're at? And you're also training a lot of folks. How do you not have them, free ride on your, training vouchers and then go work for the enemy?
I think one thing I've said, you have an open door whether you like it or not. So people can try to protect and keep, I've invested in the only way you keep people nowadays is provide interesting, exciting work. And I think that's what we're trying to prove. First Build, we have people just coming in. We hired one employee that we found, I went in there. We're open from 9 in the morning till 9 at night. We're open 6 days a week, so it's a different kind of place. And I came in one Saturday, wanted to actually use some equipment. I found an employee sleeping there, right? We were worried this kid's homeless or something. Well, he just loved the place so much, we hired him on. I mean, we couldn't get rid of him. So I said, why don't we actually hire him? The kids. So I think you have to have places that are exciting, and you got to be in tune with what people want. What kind of careers, what are they looking for?
I want to work, Margaret, I want to sleep in my office. I love it so much. Let me take a question or two real quickly. Yes, hi, let's get you a microphone real quick. This is Ben, he's going to run it over real fast. We're going to do two quick comments real quick and then a response. Hi,
Real
who
quick,
are you?
Ellen Dunham-Jones from Georgia Tech.
Good to see you, Ellen.
My question is that you mentioned the manufacturing wants to be more localized, we're seeing more customization. With 3D printers and
right.
The size, do you see manufacturing also becoming much more decentralized, and instead of one big plant in one city, it's 1,000?
Beautiful. But before you answer that, let me go right here to this lady as well. 3D printing and really taking on the big can be small and the small can be big. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Tanya Hicks, and my company is Women Do Everything. I am a master electrician, and I also have an electrical contracting company. I've been in business 17 years, but I'm an industrial electrician by trade.
Uh-huh.
And so I came here because he was going to be here, because I love GE.
Thank you.
And what I wanted to know, because with Women Do Everything, we're introducing women and helping them get trained in male-dominated industries like construction and manufacturing.
Right.
Is when it comes to your appliances, you said a little bit about training, because we want to train women to work on the latest technologies, to not just work on the motors, but also work on the digital parts of your new appliances.
Super, thank you. So 2 quick questions.
Yeah,
I'd
2
love to
good
get
ones.
this one on 3D printing and what that's doing as a dynamic in this, and the other is really how do you create ongoing, continue next generation training, and particularly with women? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, so the first localized, I do believe it. If you look at First Build, we really learned a lot from a company called Local Motors. This Jay Rogers, if you look, has the philosophy that you will localize.
They can print a car in like
exactly.
an island.
So I do see
somewhere,
it now.
yeah.
Jay thinks it's coming really quick. I don't know how quick, but I think you're going to start seeing maybe mass platforms with customizing platforms locally. And I think certain industries are going to want to localize more, lighting, different cities. So I do think that's the future. I think we'll look back 30 years from now and see some of these big, massive factories and question, was that really the right thing? Now, as far as, women in the workforce, from a technical standpoint, it's a real issue. We do a lot of work with the universities. We do a lot of work with our local high schools, elementary schools, is people need to understand that what these jobs are like, right? And that these jobs are interesting. We need to get, because you have students, my daughter was a perfect example, love science, love math, but she's now kind of wanting to get into your type of field, right? But I'm like, no, you should be an engineer.
You say that so disdainfully.
But I think it's a big education we have to do. And I think, with new technology, with software, I'm seeing some progress, but there is still a gap. University of Louisville, we only have about 10%, 12% of the students going through the engineering school are female. And we have to do something as a country, because there's so many bright minds that aren't being applied where they can add a lot of value.
Do you find ways to work with organizations like hers that are actually working with networks of women to try to kind of continue to build? Do you have outreach arms?
We do, and we do a lot with STEM, so we do a lot locally with students. We do a lot with First Build, trying to bring people in and get a lot of exposure, because I think a lot is early exposure. The problem, a lot of people want to work with universities, that's too late. You got to work with elementary schools and show that, this is interesting and you have an ability, right? That you can be really successful at it. And so it's a long-term investment, but that's where you have to make it, I believe.
Well, thank you for taking off your tie. Thank you for Opal and the pizza thing. Thank you for sharing us a little bit about how you're running your company today. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Nolan, President and CEO of GE. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks very much.
Next, a conversation with American workers. Please welcome William Kip Glenn, a former Carrier Plant employee. Stephanie Klang, a professional truck driver with CFI. Zaria Walker, an assistant manager at Juma Ventures. And Michael Brown, an Army veteran and research scientist at the Georgia Tech Research Institute. To lead the conversation, please welcome back the Atlantic's Allison Stewart.
I'm excited to talk to you all. Okay, the mic people don't like me. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Do you have a stick mic, maybe? Let me see what I can do. Some magic. Hello? Yay! All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Stephanie, I want to start with you. We had a nice little conversation back there. You have been driving trucks for 38 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Don't call me ma'am.
It sounds aging, doesn't it? We're too busy to get old.
Tell me what's changed the most dramatically from when you first started as a truck driver? I'm sorry, everybody.
So many things have changed over the decades. Our trailers have gotten longer. Has standardized the weight and length limits across the nation. Just in the past 10 years, I'd say technology has made our life easier and a little more difficult. Before, I go different places every single load, and I run all 48 states. And sometimes information is not the clearest. And so Google Maps and, just GPSs have been a tremendous help. You still have to research your route. You just don't take a truck anywhere. But with more trucks on the road and more product being shipped, we have a serious lack of safe parking. And that's what I was speaking to the mayor about downstairs. If it would really reduce your traffic in the morning and the evening if trucks had a place to come into in the evening. We want to be here. We want to get our rest here, because once we start our electronic log in the morning, we have exactly 14 hours to use that day. And so we don't want to get up at 5 a.m. and sit in traffic coming in. So if you had some safe places to park here inside, where we could deliver all the goods that are necessary for business, because if it doesn't come in the dock door, you can't use it or sell it out the front door. It would seriously reduce traffic. It would make my life easier. It's all about me. So there've been a lot of changes, and of course the cell phones and being able to stay in touch, and the phone apps coming down the line are just fantastic. And I always ask the question, if you're from Atlanta, do you know where the truck stops are? No. You just think things magically appear. And we try to make it look like that. We do. We try to make it look like that. But, it's just things that people don't think about.
Are there many women truck drivers?
We are about 7% of the driving force. And by the way, trucking has always paid every driver exactly the same, no matter man, woman, no matter your sexual orientation, your color. It pays by the mile. If you have the skills to drive the truck and the dedication to come in and drive one and the safety record, you will have a job at exactly what everybody else makes. So we are about 7% of the driving force. Where we lose a lot of drivers is between 18 and 21, as they graduate high school, and they usually start other commitments, careers, families. And so when they can drive interstate at 21, we've lost them already. We get a lot of women who have raised their children and retired and said, bye-bye, I'm going trucking. And we'll hire you. We will hire you. There's a shortage right now of about 45,000 drivers.
So that's semi-retirement.
There you go. There you go, semi-retirement, except you do have to get up and work.
I'm going to ask my colleagues to put the shot clock up so I know how much time I have, because I'll talk all day unless you give me a time when I have to get off the stage with these folks. Michael, I want to talk to you. You were active duty in the U.S. Army for 8 years, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you for your service, first of all.
You're welcome.
And now you have transitioned into computer science. Tell me how you made that transition.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a hard transition. I did finish my bachelor's degree in computer science at the University of Cincinnati before I joined the military. So when I was looking at the end of my commitment, when it was time to start thinking about life after the Army, I started looking at ways to kind of fix the gap in my resume. My work in the military wasn't related to the computing industry at all. And as we all know, skills in the computing industry become obsolete very, very quickly, and it's a challenge for even full-time professionals to stay current. So I started looking at ways to pursue education while I was still in the service, and then I stumbled across the Georgia Tech's new offering, the Online Masters of Computer Science program called OMSCS for short. I know we're limited on time, so I'll avoid that mouthful from here on out. So I applied to OMSCS, and I spent 2 years in that program, and then shortly after Shortly after finishing my commitment to the military, I started applying to jobs at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and frankly, had I not pursued that educational opportunity and had an opportunity like that not presented itself that was flexible in terms of cost, location, and time, I likely would have had a much poorer outcome for my transition out of the military.
You mentioned how it's difficult to stay up on everything, and especially in computer science. How do you do it?
It's one thing that I learned in the military, and I'm forever thankful for. It's a skill that will serve the American worker in the future, and that is to constantly be ready to learn something new and to dive into a completely new field. We've seen huge and drastic changes in the landscape of the computing industry. Artificial intelligence is now a mainstream job and not something that's only being researched at the public universities in the United States and abroad. We've seen jobs like information technology become vocationalized, and we've seen wages drop. So we've seen a very diverse and almost a mirror of the American economy in general in the computing industry. So it's very important that you're prepared to essentially move up the ladder. It's no longer sufficient just to enter the computing industry. You now actually have to climb a ladder within that computing industry, both a technical and a professional ladder.
Zaria, if you go to the Juma website, there's a lovely picture of you and a quote that says, "I would not have a job if it was not for Juma."
Well, what I mean is they gave me a chance to prove to them that I'm the best employee there is out there. And I did, and that's where I'm at now as assistant manager.
And I should point out, you're an assistant manager and you're just 20 years old.
Yes.
Does that feel, yay, right? When you were in high school, you were going to high school, you were enrolled in the Logistics Education and Pathways program, and you were working. How did you balance all of that?
Well, when I was in high school, I had about 5 classes, and I did classes during the day. At night, I did the Georgia Tech Leap, and during the weekends, I worked. And Georgia Tech is basically what I did in high school. It was online, so it was very easy. One extra class wouldn't hurt, so.
I know grown people who are not that organized. Where did you learn those skills, those organization skills, or is that just something in you?
I would say yes.
It's in you?
There's something in me.
Okay. Pastor, hi. You worked for 25 years at Carrier Industries in Indianapolis, excuse me. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Stephanie. What's changed the most from when you first started your work to when you left?
Well, probably the biggest thing within the 25 years, when I first started out there at Carrier, I was the screw machine. I was the one who shot all the screws into the heat exchangers, and eventually they developed automation that basically took my job away, put it into an automated situation where I got moved to a different position, and all of the heat exchangers that I was putting together by hand were being put together through automation. So basically, automation has improved the production, and our quality control became a different aspect at that point in time. It wasn't on-site, quality control right away. When the finished product was there, we had our quality people come in, and they would make sure that everything was where it's supposed to be, and we did it periodically too. And I always felt like I was an inspector at the same time if I was doing my job, regardless of what my job was to do. And that's why Carrier, I believe, set industry levels, industry records for quality and for production. So throughout those years, they've been very productive, and it kind of saddened me a little bit when we stood there one morning and they made the announcement that they were moving to Mexico. And the shock and awe of it was tremendous. There are people there with 35, 40 years thinking, I need 5 more years to retire.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, I had already encouraged and taken advantage of what they call the Employee Scholar Program.
Explain to
And
people what that is.
basically, while we were there working at Carrier, we were allowed to have a certain amount of time, if we enrolled, a certain amount of time off of work to study. And basically, we all had to be, that took advantage of the program, we all had to be basically what we would call part-time students. We couldn't enroll full-time, it would be too big of a workload. But I started in 2003 when they basically started the, okay, we're paying the school. And that was a great move by Carrier, because a lot of people did get to take advantage of it. And it wasn't a reimbursement program where we had to put the money up front ourselves and then they reimburse us. They made it to where we could enroll, and there was a certain area of the corporation that took care of all of the credit hours that were given and how much each one, and they paid them directly. So we really didn't have to bother with a whole lot of that, but turn our grades in. But I took advantage of that. I started in 2003, and I graduated in 2010 with a bachelor's degree
Oh, congratulations.
in psychology. It was
Good job.
full paid for. So my hat's off to Carrier for that. They have supported my family for 25 years, and even though being a union worker, we took pride in our product, and they still do. I took the severance buyout. My wife and I prayed a lot about it. And the reason why is because not only was I ready to move on, but I was always one of those kids who never could sit still. So I jumped around Carrier. I went from being what they call a production associate B all the way to becoming a group leader and a press operator and a fab tech, and then a fab tech group leader. So, and I was also involved in the union, in the leadership there. So it was an awesome ride, and they're still paying for my master's degree right now.
Wow.
So that's an awesome deal, and you know, they put together for us, and plus it saved a younger person within that construct of them moving to Mexico.
Yeah.
It saved them the time and the job. You know, they don't have to go home and tell their wife, you know, I don't have a job anymore, you know.
Stephanie, is there any kind of reskilling training in your industry now to help bring in younger people, or at least to help people who already have been in the company for a long time, the way that Kip was?
Not that I know of. I think trucking is just focused on constantly training and retraining us to be safer drivers.
Safer.
They do a lot of that. You know, we have required classes we have to take, and they do some fun things, like they have a skid pad where they actually put you in a skid. So, you know, it's all about safe driving.
Juma, Zaria, we talked downstairs about your big dreams. What is it that you hope to do long term?
Well, I want to be a crime scene investigator. And I know that I have to earn a bachelor's degree. I have to go to a police academy, enroll in a police academy. I have to maybe do a ride-along and get certified. And I know that they make around $45,000 a year. So I just like to investigate. And I want to help everybody out, so, you know.
You mentioned that to me, that part of what you want to do, and this sort of fits with the millennial profile, is you want to be able to help people. Tell us a little bit more about why you want to do that, and maybe reflect on the people who've helped you get where you are.
Well, I mean, there's one reason. There's no need to be selfish. I mean, give people a chance. You never know what they can do for you. And, I mean, you'll be really surprised.
You're all good. You're all good. Michael, you said something sort of interesting to me, and I hadn't really thought about it before you said to all of us, is that idea that computer science and the tech industry is starting to feel some of the same effects that Kip just mentioned in manufacturing. Could you talk a little bit more about that and why you think that's happening?
Absolutely. So 30 years ago, if you got a degree in computer science, there were a lot of different fields you could go into, and a lot of those fields have changed. IT is, in particular, one of the most, I guess you would say, hard-hit sectors of the computer science industry. We saw it go from something that was being actively researched to something that became a commodity, something that was then in the early 2000s being outsourced by major companies. For example, I briefly worked at Procter & Gamble, and they had recently outsourced all their IT staff, which used to be in-house employees, to Hewlett-Packard. And since Hewlett-Packard has now outsourced those jobs to India, outsourced those jobs to other developing markets where the labor is cheaper and where technical barriers have been lifted. So that's one of the issues that we're seeing now with the vocationalization of some of these disciplines. Additionally, the same way that the American economy or the American educational system has seen the bar raised from the high school diploma to the four-year bachelor's degree as an entry-level educational milestone, we're now seeing that in some of the areas of computer science. For example, had I not completed my master's degree online through Georgia Tech, I likely would have been working in a job more closely associated with software development, something where it's now starting to become a commodity job in and of itself. We're seeing artificial intelligence build websites. We're seeing a lot of actual systems development being shipped overseas, or seeing those jobs move overseas. So now we're starting to see graduate level degrees become the new entry level, or not the new entry level, I'll say the new minimum milestone for jobs in research like the one that I have now. So when it comes to finding, I guess you could say, more interesting and more novel work in the field of the computing industry, the bar is rising rapidly.
And then there's also the issue of how you pay for all that education.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that has not been addressed by most online programs. It's one thing that Georgia Tech addressed. So they were probably the first and still remain the only program that has understood that your online student does not need things like access to the library, access to the gym, access to parking, or a dormitory to live in. So as a result, those fees are not paid by your online students, and it's now why you can obtain a master's degree for about $7,000 on the whole, as opposed to offerings from other top 10 universities like Stanford. They offer one, but I believe the cost was somewhere in the range of $65,000 to attend that school online. So had that been my only option, I clearly would have not pursued that while I was still in the military. So really, Georgia Tech has a unique offering, one that's transcended a lot of barriers, and it's really the only one that's is far-reaching. I believe by last count, there's an OMS student in each state in the union. There's about 108 countries represented in terms of where students are from, just about every time zone, so it's very difficult to go someplace in the world and not find somebody who's learning through Georgia Tech and continuing their education.
That was interesting. The thing that you two have in common is you took advantage of online education to move forward. Kip, I want to ask you about something because everybody knows about Carrier, and when Donald Trump said he was going to help keep jobs in the United States, they ended up keeping, I believe, the gas furnace business and getting a $7 million tax incentive from the state. Those are the headlines. That's what we read. What was it like actually for people on the ground who worked in that company? What did that end up meaning for them in real life?
Well, the attitude was basically still almost rebellious in certain areas of the manufacturing force, because they knew that all of the jobs weren't going to be saved. They knew that there was only going to be a percentage of the jobs that would actually be saved. And they were just waiting, to see who was going to get cut. I mean, it was one of those situations where,
awful.
They came up, you've ever heard the song, "The Waiting's the Hardest Part"? You didn't know where you fit or where you were going to, if you were at this level, say at a group leader at the highest pay grade level or whatever, within that cut, and you wouldn't have the seniority to hold that position, you could be looking at a $3 to $4 an hour cut in your pay, which would affect your bills, which would affect your lifestyle. And so a lot of people were still kind of, should I go or should I stay? And I was at the point where, like I said, after a lot of prayer and discussion with my wife, that it was time for me to go. It was time for me to go and move on. And right now I'm still in contact with a lot of the people there. And
how are they feeling?
The sentiment is really, truthfully, the sentiment from myself and then my empathy for them is like, hey, get ready. We don't know. You don't know. We didn't know this was going to happen. Honestly, the announcement came in the middle of a production day.
Wow.
At 11 o'clock, they called us all up to the front, and they had this big area where they called the gray area, the Green Mile, is what they call it, the greeting area for people coming into the plant. And they called us all up there, and we're all standing around, and all of a sudden one of the CEOs from Carrier announced that they were moving to Mexico. And, it was just like shock and awe. And somebody filmed that and put it on YouTube, and it went viral. And,
For a reason, because people really related to it.
Yeah, and it was a big issue. I mean, there was over 1,200 jobs in that plant, and only 700 of them were allowed to stay. So you can see, there was people with 10 years seniority that were being laid off, and they had callback rights and all that. But in the meantime, what's paying the bills? And we talk about automation and robotics and all that coming in, and they were complaining about a lot of that because it took jobs away from humans, but at the same time, we knew it was happening. We saw it from 25 years ago to now.
You can read about it, but when it really happens to you, it's a different story. We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask Stephanie one more question. I'm going to ask you to speak for all American workers. If you had an opportunity to talk to the head of one of your companies that you work for, or at head of a company about the future of the American worker, as someone who's out there doing it every day, what would you want them to think about when they're making their next set of decisions?
Well, let me preface this by saying that I listen a lot to NPR as I'm driving. It's the greatest job in the world to listen to NPR all day with a cat sleeping on your lap. And I listen a lot about, happiness in the future, and people want to make a difference. If I had the CEO's ear, I said, hire the best people possible, and then don't micromanage them. Give them guidelines and turn them loose. You'll never know what happens with the good ideas. And get feedback from the people actually doing the job to streamline procedure to save money. But people want to make a difference. Something that I'm looking kind of forward to is working 3 more years on the road. And don't get me wrong, I love driving. I don't like traffic. Right now I'm trying to balance between stress and boredom. So once in a while I get to pick and choose where I go, not often. And I always pick rural America, very truck friendly people. Not that you're not friendly here in the city, it's just getting here to see you. That's the problem. But one of the jobs that I'm looking forward to or possibly looking at, it would be a customer service position with my company, because I know what the driver needs to know to safely deliver and take care of the customer, because I've been to all of them. But when I go in and petition for this job, I also don't want to be told what to do, because I've been by myself for several decades and I know best.
So you're saying CEOs should listen to their workers, support them, and then let them do their job.
Right, listen to the workers, make them feel like they can make a difference. If I could come in and do customer service and make a difference, I'd be there. So,
thank you all for sharing your stories. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much, Michael, Kip, Stephanie, Zaria, and Allison. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a short break. There's coffee out there. There's food. Check your email. Introduce yourself to your neighbor, and we're going to bring you back real quickly because we've got lots left for the morning. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. So, a lot of the conversation that we've had already is happening in part because jobs change due to technology, due to innovation. Tale as old as time. So we could spend this time kind of going into the dystopian future and talking about our robot overlords, but I think what I'd prefer to do is start off on a note where we talk about some of the opportunities that technological changes and disruption present. So I want you guys to talk a little bit about where you see the opportunity for job growth and changes. Mark, I'm going to start with you since you're next to me.
Okay, great. Well, so when I think about the opportunities, I think about a couple of trends that have happened in the last 15, 17 years. First off, if you look at corporate IT, we spent a lot of our time chasing cost reduction, and we've sent a lot of jobs to cheaper locales around the world where labor is cheaper. If you look at just one statistic, if you look at the year 2000, there were 73 US IT workers for every one in India. And if you look at today, there's 0.4 US IT workers for every one in India. In that same time frame, though, if you look at the companies that make products, tech products like Apple and Google as sort of the poster children for it, they invested a lot in building a great user experience and have done tremendously well, right? So it's led to a lot of success. And I think these two trends together create a real opportunity for taking a product mindset to applying technology to just about every industry that is here. And I think that it also actually creates an opportunity for local jobs in the US. So even though we've shipped a lot of them offshore to save cost, you need people in the same time zone, in the same business climate, in the same sort of consumer context to understand how to build a great experience. And I think that creates a great opportunity.
Yeah. Beth, Karan, where are you guys seeing opportunities?
So I'd say I think where we see opportunity is technology and technology jobs being a driver for inclusive growth. And I say that for two reasons. One is there are lots of these jobs that are open today. And so there are over 500,000 jobs in the US today that are open. And they're becoming harder and harder to fill. These jobs are on average $50,000 to $60,000 a year. They're firmly middle-class jobs, and they are everywhere in the country. So more than 2/3 of those jobs are not in the tech sector. These are not in Silicon Valley. They're not in the Bay Area. They're everywhere. They are in pharmaceutical companies, and healthcare companies, and insurance companies, financial services companies, all across the country. Providence, Rhode Island, Detroit, everywhere. So these really are today, and we can talk about the future later, but today, middle-class jobs that are open and present opportunities for many folks who need that today.
And I'll build on that because I agree with what both folks have said. But when we think about how technology is changing jobs, it's not just changing jobs in technology companies or in the IT function in your company. It is actually changing everybody's job. There's not a person in this room, I'm sure, who has not used technology already today to do part of their job, because I'm pretty sure everybody's checked their email at least once. So it is embedded in every job. It's in advanced manufacturing. It's in healthcare. And it creates opportunities. It also, I think, creates an opportunity to think differently about how we hire people, how we train people, how we enable people to have good jobs and good careers. So think about your ability to demonstrate your skill. At Skillful, we are focused on skills-based hiring, getting companies and individuals to really say, what can I do today? What can I learn to do? You know, you could think today how you can do that in parts of software, right? People give you a test to see whether you can go find bugs. But if you think about technology and how it could enable that, you could do a virtual reality simulation of somebody in a computer service, customer service job, and enable them to show what they can do versus relying on pedigrees. And I think this linkage to some of the earlier conversations around credentials become important, because when we focus on what people can do and can learn, I think we open up a lot of opportunities, particularly for people who don't have the traditional, the 70% of the American workforce that does not have a bachelor's degree.
Right. So, Karan, I want you to follow up on this. You just said 500,000 jobs don't have workers. The labor force participation is low. obviously we're missing something here. We're either missing something on the hiring front, or we're missing something on the skills and training front, or
Yeah.
we're missing both. Can you talk a little bit about how we bridge that gap and what, in fact, is missing here?
Yeah, so this is the focus of opportunity at work. And I would say there are a few things. The first thing I'd start is building off of what Beth was saying, is that we have to rethink the way hiring is done. And it has to be based on demonstrations of skill and not pedigree. And I'll give you very specific examples of that. So today, if you pick up most middle-class job descriptions and you read them, they will say 4-year degree required. They will say X number of years of work experience required, typically in the exact same thing that you are hiring a quote-unquote entry-level worker for. And so that signal filters out millions of people. So there are 30+ million people in the country today who started college and didn't finish, right? And what that job description is saying to them is that you haven't learned anything. Like, that is what the signal is in the market today. So if that person applies, they could have learned it. They could have learned it through a mentor. They could have learned it on the job somewhere else. They could have learned it online. They could have learned it in a workforce training program. They could have learned it through their life experience in many different ways. But this is baked into the business process. So as soon as they apply in the applicant tracking systems, in the resume keyword filters, like, that business process is screening them out automatically. No one is intentionally saying you are not qualified for this job. It is unintentional, and it's based into the process and the incentive system that exists today. And until we change that side of the equation, we can do a lot of work on training and getting skills, but we won't know why they're not getting a job. Right?
Beth, you seem eager to jump in there.
I agree. I'll give you another example. There's a company in Colorado called Aquahot. We're working in Colorado. And they make things you attach to your RV. And they couldn't hire anybody. They had the dilemma. They were advertising for mechanical engineers. We worked with them in Skillful to say, okay, what really are the skills you need in this job? And it turns out you did not need a degree in mechanical engineering. You needed very specific knowledge and skills. Their old postings for mechanical engineers got them actually 0 applicants. And when they went through this skills process and changed what they wanted, it turns out if you were a diesel mechanic, you actually had what they need. They now had applicants. They now can grow the company. They are creating great jobs for people who, and frankly, with more upside than those folks had had in their previous work. So that's a place where you say, what are the skills that I need at a granular level? And that opens up the pool, and for this company, it opened up growth opportunities.
Mark, how are you thinking about the hiring process, given everything that we've just heard about some of the changes that need to take place more broadly?
Yeah, at Nexient, we do a lot of skills-based hiring as well. So it's nice for us in that we're hiring a lot of developers, and we can very concisely give them tests to understand how good they are at writing code and how good they are at developing. But we can also, and we were talking about this earlier, we can also sort of take that same idea and apply it to other areas. So if we're hiring somebody into a position who's going to be doing communications primarily, or maybe they're an analyst who's going to be capturing requirements, we try to give them a test where we ask them to take some set of requirements and boil it down to a quick summary. And you get very different results when you ask somebody to create that deliverable. And so it's a much better way than just talking about what they've done and really seeing what their work product looks like. And you tend to get the people who produce great work products.
Yeah. When we talk about technology and disruption, and this is a complaint that I hear a lot, people tend to focus on coastal cities. They talk about Silicon Valley, they talk about San Francisco, they talk a little bit about New York, they talk about DC. Beth, you're in Colorado, Mark, you're in Ann Arbor quite a bit. How do we think about bringing workers with these skills and jobs that need these skills to the rest of the country where the workers are and where they need work?
Well, at Nexient, that's what we're all about. So we have a delivery center-based model with delivery centers in Michigan and Indiana. And so what we're doing is we're building this community of technologists in the Midwest, and they love it. There's a lot of people in the Midwest that want to go to one of the coasts, but I think there are even more people that go to school somewhere in the Midwest and want to stay in the Midwest in general. So we can recruit them, we can bring them into Ann Arbor, and they love the lifestyle. They love the community we've built. So there's this community of world-class technologists who work on problems for all sorts of both Fortune 500 companies and software companies building product. So they love the work, they love the lifestyle, and they get to stay in the Midwest.
And I think in Colorado, we started this effort in Colorado because there was a real commitment from a whole set of actors across the state, starting with Governor Hickenlooper and his entire administration, from the business community, the community college system, a network of nonprofits. We had LinkedIn and now Microsoft as a partner, and it was about partnerships. How do we create opportunities for Coloradans in particular? There's lots of people moving to Denver. Those actually tend to be folks who have a college degree, and they wanted to make sure that we were creating opportunities and pathways in this growing economy for the folks who are in Colorado who might not have that degree, but have the skills, have the aspirations, have the capabilities. And so I think this ability, and we heard some of this earlier when we were talking about what's going on here in Atlanta, when you create that integrated view and get people pulling in the same direction, you can drive that kind of change and create the opportunities that allow individuals to thrive and businesses to grow.
I'll build on that and say one of the initiatives of Opportunity at Work is the Tech Hire network that exists in 70-plus places across the country, and where you see really vibrant local ecosystems are not always in those places. They are in Providence, Rhode Island, in Akron, Ohio, in Eastern Kentucky, in Nashville, where, to your point, what is happening is the hiring piece is critical, but it's not enough. Right? You need the ecosystem that is then bringing together training providers, education providers, right? Today, this morning, Georgia Tech and then the technical college system talking about what those partnerships look like. What is the role of community-based organizations, of outreach organizations? Because even if the hiring was based on demonstrations of skill, which we believe is critical, people need a pathway to be able to then get the skill so that they can then show it. And that's going to require, for it to be truly inclusive, all of that sort of local actors coming together and working hand in hand with the right signals of what are the skills, how do you demonstrate them, and then therefore how do you train for them.
Right. And when we talk about pipeline, Beth, I know in Colorado, they recently, I believe, passed a law related to apprenticeships and letting high schoolers know what their options are as far as careers. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it plays in?
Sure. The program, Colorado has put in place an apprenticeship program. It's called CareerWise. And importantly, it is part of this integrated view that's been driven through the governor and the business community. In fact, a group called the Business and Experimental Learning Commission, the Bell Commission. The idea is to say, as people are going through school, we want them to be thinking about what are the range of options that are available that will allow them to have a sustaining job, a satisfying job that could involve college completion, but not necessarily. And so part of the law, besides creating opportunities for apprenticeships in high school, co-enrollment in the community college system, and a whole range of things, is ensuring that the individuals in the high school system who are talking to kids about their future talk about the range of options, so it is not college or bust, because then you don't create a set of people who say, well, if I don't do that, or if I start and I don't finish, I therefore have lost, right? That there are multiple pathways to succeed, and we actually, Skillful, working with CareerWise and a bunch of others, has actually explicitly laid out sort of, here's a set of pathways and the kind of skills you need to build, whether that's in an IT job or a healthcare job or a business services job. So it is very much trying to change the frame to say, how can we get someone to imagine a future that they can get excited about and then understand the variety of ways that they can get there?
So when we think about tech jobs, I think a lot of times people think of the tech industry as its own siloed thing. And the thing that I've been hearing a lot since I got here and since we started having these conversations is that that is not a useful way to think about things. There are, of course, the tech industry, but as you said, there are all the ways that tech is integrated into all of our jobs, changing all of our lives constantly. So with that in mind, what are the skills that workers should be prioritizing when it comes to getting trained in the first place or getting retrained? Karan, I'm going to start with you.
So we have been developing a set of what we call validation solutions to do tech hiring, which is demonstrations of skill that then companies say, okay, if you can demonstrate that, we will look at this pool of talent that we are screening out already, and for individuals to do that and get feedback. And I would say, so there are a set of hard skills that are dependent on the role, that you would need, whether it's a web developer or whether it is a network engineer. But then what we hear a lot is then there's a set of behavioral skills, and the ones that keep coming up often are problem solving, teamwork, communication, and then this notion of this, are you learning to learn, right? Are you going to be able to learn on the job as the pace of change, accelerates, right, in terms of what's happening? And the interesting thing about what we're seeing is that, yes, people need ways to learn about those skills, and then when they are demonstrating them, the other thing that individuals need is feedback. They need feedback on, this is where the gap is, and this is the part that I need to close or do better on, because that is how learning and growth happens. So in one of the validations, I will give a very specific example, to assess these soft skills, what we do is we have a volunteer network of HR professionals that do a 30-minute mock interview with the individuals, and the last 5 to 10 minutes of that is feedback back to the individuals. So yes, they're assessing problem solving, communication, teamwork skills, but they're also giving that individual feedback on what they need to do better. And one of the first ones we did, we had an individual who was a server in a restaurant, wanted a job in web development and had learned the skill, and the question was, give me an example of a time where you've worked in a team. And the answer of this individual was, well, I can't remember of a time that I worked in a team. And the feedback was, well, tell me, what do you do as a server? You have to work with the kitchen staff, you have to expedite things, you have to manage shift change, you have to manage expectations with your supervisor and your shift manager. That is working in a team. You need to be able to express that, right, in these ways. So yes, I mean, those are the skills that come up. You need to be able to teach that, but you need feedback, and you need that constant cycle loop that doesn't happen today very often, definitely not in the hiring process.
Mark, I want you to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah,
What are the
so
priorities?
I would agree, and we've got a couple of sort of terms we use at Nexient to talk about it. So one is, we talk about this idea of learning how to learn. And we talk about our employees as technology athletes, the idea being that athletes are always constantly working out to try to make themselves better. We want technology people who are doing the same thing, because the one thing that's constant is that it's always changing. Whatever technology you need to know something new a year from now. So we talk about technology athletes. We also talk about what we call T-shaped employees. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that the T, sort of the long part of the T, is some area you've got a lot of depth in. It may be a particular area of programming or business analysis or something. And then the top of the T is this ability to work with the team, right? And so it's all the collaboration skills required. At the end of the day, I think the most innovation comes from cross-functional teams. When you get people with very different perspectives, you get the business owner who really knows what the customer wants, the technology architect who really knows what's possible. And until those two sort of work together, that's when you really get the innovation to happen. That something new that really meets an unmet need of the end user is possible because of some architecture component. And that's what we're trying to get with those T-shaped technology athletes.
So I have one or two more questions for our panel, but we want to, as always, make sure you guys have your voices heard too. If you have questions, start thinking about them, condensing them, make sure they're questions and not comments, et cetera. So when we talk about the tech pipeline, we would be remiss to not discuss how we make sure that it is equitable and inclusive. A lot of the criticism that we hear about tech jobs and the people who are moving up in tech jobs is that is predominantly a white, male, affluent pipeline. So I'm wondering, as we think about changing jobs and as we think about training and retraining workers, how can we make sure that these skills and all of this education is accessible to a wider scope of people? Beth, I want you to start.
So I'll start, but I'm sure others will chime in. I think we have to really begin to think about, can an individual imagine themselves in this job, right? If you don't know somebody who is a back-end software developer, it is hard to figure out how you're going to imagine yourself in that job and start yourself down a path to get there. It is hard to, so how do we start to do that? How do we start to expose people to those opportunities at multiple points in their life? And we can't just do this, we have to do it in the K through 12 system, but I think we have to think more creatively about how we do it elsewhere, because it won't change fast enough if we just wait for each class of people to come through. So one of the things we've tried to do in our work with many of our partner organizations across Colorado is, how do we give people an ability to imagine themselves in that job? If you are a FedEx truck driver, you actually use or a UPS truck driver. I know I'm in Atlanta. Sorry. You use technology every day, right? It's a very technology-enabled job. You are probably comfortable with technology, or you couldn't do that job. So maybe you want to do something different. How do you begin to understand what those skills are and how do they relate? So one is imagining yourself there. 2 is finding the connections to those opportunities. And 3, actually more ways of, if that's the sort of individual end, getting employers, and this comes back to skills, right? Having a different frame for what they're looking for and recognizing the sometimes unintended bias in the way that the criteria and heuristics they're using by definition exclude folks. And so how do you think about different ways of working that through? But it's got to be intentional.
And if you have addition to that.
One thing that I would add to that, which we haven't talked about in this conversation, is I also think you need to rethink and redesign the way financing of education and training is done. Because today, if you are in the, if you want to attend a training program that is $10,000 or so, for a low-income individual, for people from underrepresented communities, that is a very, you don't have that, and you are excluded based on your FICO score if you want to go get a loan. So again, that is baked into the system today. On the public side of the way financing is done, very little of it is actually tied to outcomes. Very little of it is tied to, is this going to make you better off? Think about the idea that, you know, we have $1.4 trillion of student debt at around 25% default or delinquency right now in the country, right? None of that financing was ever designed with the idea of, is this going to get you better off? If it gets you better off, great, but that was not part of the design principle, right, if you look at the system today. So I think rethinking that, because that then also ties to access. Right. Who has access to those opportunities in the system?
Right. All right, do we have some audience questions? I think there's one right, or 2 right up here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Michelle Toulier from Georgia Tech, where I'm the director of the Career Center. My question's for any of you, but it was prompted by Mark's opening comment about the opportunities in technology being heavily involved with a product mindset, and also your later comment about the importance of cross-functional collaboration. Do you think that this opens more of a door for students with a liberal arts background to contribute more in more meaningful ways and heavier ways in technology, the technology world?
Yeah, it's a great question. Absolutely, I do think it opens up the door for people with liberal arts background. One example I'd give is that the product manager is typically the core of this product mindset team, of this very small team trying to drive things, and there is no training that I know of that leads to a product manager degree, right? So you sort of pull people into that from all different walks of life and all different educational backgrounds. And one area as an example that's done really well is anthropologists, because they're quite good at studying a civilization, figuring out what its norms are, figuring out what people want. And that's very much what you're trying to do in a product mindset, is figure out subsegments of who might want your product, and then study them and figure out what they really want and what they really need, even if they are not articulating it. And so that's an example. I think there are a lot of liberal arts skills that are really valuable.
Yeah, I think we have another one right here.
Hello again. My name is Jeffrey Martina. I'm the founder and CEO of Honor Code here in Atlanta, Georgia. We build coalitions between K-12 educators in Atlanta's business community to build more sustainable workforce pipelines, and we do that through providing curriculum and training to schools to bring computer science and social emotional learning into the classroom. A recent CNN article showcases how Salesforce is dedicating $12.2 million in human and financial capital in their community work in the Bay Area public schools. And my question for you all is, in your opinion, how can our business community do a better job of allocating resources over the long term now to ensure that they do not have talent gaps later on?
Great question, and I think certainly our experience in Colorado is there's lots of companies that would like to do that, and I think part of it on us working in this space is to help them translate desire into practical programs that have impact. So what are the kind of experiences? Are there opportunities? And there's a variety of ways to do it. And so I think one of the questions becomes, What is the way that a company can translate that? It could be their individuals volunteering on the Opportunity at Work platform. It could be hosting people in Colorado. You can have apprentices in your company, and that's not just because you want to do something good, it's because it is a source of future talent, and with a 2.3% unemployment rate, getting that talent early is in your business interest. You can think about how they do coaching and mentoring. So I think there's a real opportunity to turn a sort of, let me call it, broad-based desire into tangible actions, and help them understand the impact of those actions both on individuals and on their own company's results.
I will say, if I take it a step back, though, I think thinking about the future of work, and very much as the present, frankly, in terms of what's happening, we have to rethink the incentives, which are all designed today around return on invested capital, not around return on human capital. And that makes it very difficult for businesses with that incentive today to go as far as they need to go. I agree that there are things that they can do, but today, if you automated something or bought a piece of machinery, you could put that on your balance sheet for the next 5 years. Right. If you spent that money to train someone, it would be a P&L expense and you have to report it the next quarter. So thinking about what does that mean when you look at the balance sheet of a company, every CEO, or a lot of them say it, our biggest asset is our people. It's not reflected in that stock. And what does that mean for us? What decisions does that drive? What incentives does that drive? What behavior does that drive in the system? So if we're really talking about the future of work, I think we have to think systemically about what it means, right, to deliver returns on human capital for everyone, right, in the economy today, not just the top half.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
To discuss the meaning of work, please welcome Michael Bush, the CEO of Great Place to Work. Here with the Atlantic's Allison Stewart.
So to give people a sense of the volume of data that your organization has, over the past 30 years, you have surveyed more than 100 million employees. So with that in mind, let's drill down on some of that data. Aside from the obvious of why we work, to make sure we have a living wage and food on the table and keep the lights on, for Americans, why do they work, and what are the factors that go into our choices of our work?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. I was kind of worried. You were backstage doing calisthenics and whatnot. So work, why do people work? People mentioned it earlier today, what gives work meaning. People want to be respected by the people that they work for. People want to believe that the people that they work for are being honest with them. And people want to be treated fairly. People also want to work with people where they feel like they belong. They want to get along with the people that they work with, and they want to have pride in the work that they do. Not just, I want to wear something that shows the company that I work for, but I want to do a good job at my job because of the people I work with. You care that much about it. So we ask 58 questions. We correlate them over 1 million different ways, but it comes down to those 5 things that really make a difference to people and how they experience it. People know that they're being respected because you ask them about what do they hope to do in their lives and in their careers and in their job. You offer them developmental opportunities. You challenge them. You give them feedback, honest feedback. That's how they know they're respected. People feel that they're being treated fairly when they feel like they're getting paid like everyone else. They feel like their opportunities for promotions are just like everyone else. It doesn't matter who they are, what they are, or what they do in the organization. They're being treated just like everybody else.
When you meet someone, you meet them for the first time, they'll often tell you immediately what they do for a living. It's a very American thing that we live to work. But if you go in other places in the world, people work to live. Can you tell me something that's unique about the American worker, and are we so different from the global worker?
I think we're a little crazier in the U.S.
That can be good and bad.
I think right now it's bad. But anyway, I think, as you look around the world, there are people who have a healthier relationship to work. I believe that's true, particularly in Europe. In the U.S., it's drive, drive, drive. But in terms of what employees want, what working people want, it's the exact same. It's the exact same in Bogota, Colombia, Toronto, Canada, San Francisco, California, or Atlanta. It's the exact same. So even though the stresses might be different, the cultural norms might be different, the expectations might be different, the intensity of capitalism might be different, people want the same basic things.
What about in terms of generation? In terms of baby boomers to Gen X to Gen Y to millennials to Gen Z?
I hate to disappoint everybody, it's the same. There's the millennials, the most studied generation in the history of the world, okay, that we keep talking about this group as though they're different. All of a sudden they've hit the earth and this new thing has happened. Against all their best efforts, they are still becoming just like their mothers and fathers, okay? They're normal people.
They're extremely vocal, though.
They're extremely vocal.
I think that's a big difference.
How old are you?
I am 51.
Oh, okay, good. All right, I just want to make sure.
We're same thing.
I have 2 millennials at home.
Okay.
Oh, okay, so, I think it's just a matter of the time. They're no different. People say, well, they want to have purpose. They didn't go to World War II. They didn't go to Vietnam. They didn't go to Korea. There's been some purpose-driven people in society in this country. What's different is they're digital. Okay, they're digital, for sure, okay? And that makes their minds work differently. That makes their expectations in terms of what time means. Those things are different. And if they've been in the workforce since 2008, it's been nothing but good times. So you can talk about purpose a lot during good times.
Yeah.
You can talk about, I'd like to take a little time off and then get another job. That's crazy talk if it was 2007, 2008, but today it makes sense.
Right.
Because they're going to be able to get another job. So this affects how free you are and what you can say and what you expect. I don't think they expect anything more than a Gen X or a baby boomer. And this is supported by the research, by the way, what I'm saying. These aren't my opinions. I might be harder on millennials because I have 2 at home. But I hope they're not at home. They should be out doing their own thing. But what we know is that millennials, a lot of research talks about how different they are. They're not loyal. If they don't get these things, they're going to move on. The fact is, if you treat them with respect, if you develop them, if you challenge them and give them feedback, and treat them like everyone else, not so different, they're more loyal than Gen X and baby boomers. And here's how I know. We ask everybody the question, do you plan to stay here for a long time? They say yes, 13 times more than Gen X and baby boomers.
Wow, that's interesting.
Okay, so that is a statistical difference, but it's kind of counter what a lot of the research is saying. So if you want to keep a millennial, everybody wants to know, how do I keep a millennial? Then it's not the ping pong table. It's not the bring a pet to work. Everybody likes that. It's really that they're going to be treated like a person, not an employee. The way to keep a millennial is not those things. It's to say, what else would you like to learn about here? And let me give you some feedback. They're going to go home because they haven't had that experience.
Interesting.
And when people haven't had something, they value it even more. So it's just like difference between men and women, people of color, majority. Everybody wants to be treated fairly and with respect, but if you've been treated disrespectfully, you really like respect.
Yeah. Or you're gone.
Or you're gone.
Or you're gone.
Okay? So.
You work with Fortune Magazine to figure out what the 100 best companies to work for. Let's talk about the companies now. We talked about employees a little bit. What are some of the factors to get on that list?
Okay, so I'm glad I wasn't going to bring their name up since it's a different magazine here.
Oh,
So
well,
you've
know.
liberated me. That is our media partner.
Printed media has to stick together at this point.
Okay, well, sounds good. All right, so that is our media partner. And what we do is we publish lists in that magazine. The one that most people know is the 100 Best Companies list, which comes out in March of every year. And those are the elite companies. And how do we know they're elite? We score what their employees say. Unlike other lists, you only make ours if your employees, based on what your employees say. Over 70% of the scoring is weighted on what the employees say. It doesn't matter what management. Matter of fact, we don't ask management. We ask the employees. So we use that scoring, then we look at values, HR practices and policies, and see if they're consistent with the employee experience. And then we score you. It's very analytical, driven by the employee data, and then we rank companies. And so you'll have a company at the top, and you'll have, kind of all the way through across all industries down to 100. And then we've got a lot of companies who wanted to make it, but they didn't make it. But those companies keep working on it, not just to make the list, because the way to make the list isn't to be about the list. It's how you treat your employees. And the thing that's different about these companies, they know that if you give employees a great experience, you trust them and treat them in a way that builds trust with them. The values of the company, they can feel them. Leadership treats everybody the same. We call it the for-all leader. So you have leaders who know how to manage women. They know how to manage people of color. They know how to manage people early in their career. They know how to manage people late stage in their career. They know how to manage people who English is a third language. This is the for-all leader. Leaders like that are going to drive you up that list.
So the old saying that the fish head rots from the top, or that leadership actually does set the tone.
Yeah, that you could have found a more positive
I was
analogy.
trying. I was trying. I came off the top of my head. Sorry about that.
But it is absolutely that. It is absolutely that. Leadership is what defines the experience. It absolutely defines the experience for people. You can be in a company that's we have the research to prove it. Mm-hmm. This place isn't really a great place to work, but right here, people are going crazy. They love it, and it's that leader. Same benefits, same pay, all those things, but a leader can make that happen in some tough situations. That's how important a leader is. And when you have a place that's a great place to work, for everyone, one of the things we score is it different for men and women? Is it different for salaried workers and hourly workers? Is it different for full-time and part-time? Is it different depending on your age? We look at all of that because we believe it has to be a great place to work for all. You make more money. We have the data to prove it. You make more money. A business that right now, if you look at race, and you look at the majority population and their experience of work, and then you do a racial cut and their experiences here, when that narrows, the revenue is 3 times higher. The revenue growth is 3 times higher where there's a narrow gap. And we do that with all that data that we have. So a lot of people believe you should treat people with respect because it's a good thing to do. It's just good business.
Talking about good business, one of the first panels I spoke to these 2 women about diversity and inclusion, and you have some great talks online, and one of the things you said made me bust out laughing, and I'm going to set you up for this. When the diversity officer walks in to the room...
That's when the African American walks in. Okay, so that's the bad thing about YouTube. But it's true. Okay, because I'm sitting in a room with the senior executives of the company, and we survey 10,000 companies a year, the leading companies around the world. We're in 58 countries. One thing that's the same is when I'm sitting with the senior executives, there are 80% men. The woman typically, I'm not trying to offend anybody, is the VP of HR or maybe legal.
Or communications.
Or communications, okay? And the person of color, the diversity officer, okay? And usually I look at them and they're like, hey, what's up? And I'm like, I know, man. So, like, I am rooting for you, brother, but I know what's happening here. Okay, so there's part of the reality, okay? And that's the battle. Okay, that's the battle because that company, however great they're doing, they could be doing a lot better. That's the thing about it. They could be doing a lot better. The pie can get a lot bigger. Once they get different people involved, innovation is the key. That is what's going to drive all of this. And you get those different perspectives, and then you treat them great. They don't want to be treated any better. They just want to be treated the same as everybody else. And the only way to do it is to measure it. You got to measure it, and then you got to hold leaders accountable to the way they're treating people. Not just to revenue, not just on time to market, not just on quality control, not just on ROI or ROE. It's the people experience. You got to make that important to become a for-all leader.
So if you walked into a boardroom and you saw the diversity officer had freckles and red hair, you would know that this company has made a true investment because you've got somebody in this position who you wouldn't normally see in this position.
I'd probably it'd be unusual, okay? Yeah. But I've had that experience once. that the diversity person walked in, it was a white guy. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You know, it was a first for me. Okay, so I think in the future, that should be fine.
Right.
I think it should be absolutely fine. But here's the thing. I mean, I don't want to get around what's actually happening here. There's no other executives in that C-suite that are people of color. So should the point of entry into the C-suite only be that role? No, it's ridiculous. So if it's fair, you should be able to have anybody in the role of diversity and inclusion, just like you could have anybody as the COO and anybody as the CEO. So fairness blows the doors wide open. It's only weird because we're just at a point where people aren't being promoted and developed based on capability. There's still the unconscious and conscious bias that exists.
Yeah. We talked a little earlier also about psychologically safe spaces at work. That's something that's, I'll be honest, is kind of a new idea to me. How important is that in terms of a company being successful?
It's very important. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, it's really the first issue. Yeah. And we've been asking that question for over 20 years about safety. It means something different in the U.S. than it does outside the U.S.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, in the U.S., people think psychologically safety. Outside the U.S., there are places where it's like physically safety. It's like, I don't want to die at work, okay? And that's a real issue in certain parts of the world. So it's two different things. But safety really means there's physical safety, there's emotional safety. That I can say something, and you're going to listen to what I have to say. And you're not going to react based on your biases and beliefs. You're going to be curious about what I have to say. And I might not say it perfect, but you're going to give me the room to work it out. And you're not going to treat me different tomorrow based on what I said. Okay, that's safety, because now I can be myself. And when I'm myself, I'm awesome. Okay, just like the woman we had here from Joom, I think. That you unlock that person, that's when they're in the shower thinking about how to do things better at work. You know, they're driving around the neighborhood thinking about how to do things better at work. That's how you unlock, you know, an individual and make it so a person is themselves. They're not an employee. They're bringing themselves to work. The last thing you want is an employee. They have a job, and that's the last thing you want is a person with a job. You want a person. And the person has to feel like you care about them, and you're going to make sure that the environment's right. You know, you might be okay sitting this close to me. Somebody else, it's better if I'm a little further away. I want to meet them where they are, whatever it is that makes them comfortable, because that's when I'm going to get innovation. Because innovation always requires people doing more than their job. The only way they're going to unlock themselves, you got to earn it by the way you treat them.
We're out of time, but our next panel is about jobs of tomorrow. From your data, what is going to be dramatically different about work in the future as compared to what we traditionally think about work?
Well, work in the future hopefully will look better than this picture because there's no people in it. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I was back there, I was like, damn. Okay. That's like, you know, some work in the future, but okay. People call me pessimistic sometimes. All right. Okay. But you know, I'm a very optimistic person, and I believe the future is going to be great. I believe that people's mindsets have to change, which is what's most important. Each human being has to be an entrepreneur. And even though there are great companies doing awesome things, we heard about them today, training, developing, working with the junior colleges, working with colleges, doing training themselves, online learning, all that's going to happen and needs to happen. I wouldn't put my family's future in any company's hands. Okay, that's my responsibility. That's my wife's responsibility. I think everybody should have that mindset. You shouldn't be in a job. I'm giving you this job, and because you give me a silk jacket with embroidery on the back, I'm good here. That's just not the way it is. You have to take the responsibility to know, gig economy or whatever. If you're a working person, my son, I got one who's 26, has a job, he's an engineer, has a chicken coop in his backyard. Because I'm like, you got to be able to do a lot of things. Okay, and the gig economy, do that too. He also cuts hair. I think this is perfect. I don't want him doing just one thing. You got to take care of yourself and be able to do different things. Adaptability is only learned by doing many things. You can't just trick your mind, do a Jedi mind trick to become adaptable. You got to be doing 4 or 5 things. Never have a check coming from just one place.
Get ready to adapt. Michael, thank you so much.
Okay.
Conversation about the jobs of tomorrow, welcome Jody Greenstone Miller, the co-founder and CEO of the Business Talent Group, Peter Harrison, the CEO of Snag-a-Job, and Sri Ramaswamy, a partner at the McKinsey Global Institute. Here again is Jillian White.
So we have a lot of information on what, everyone okay? On what the labor market looks like now. Labor force participation is low. People are very concerned about how long full-time jobs will last. So project out 10, 20, a little further. What does the labor market look like? Paint me a picture. Jody, I'm going to start with you.
So if you look at even what's happened in the last 10 years, Larry Katz and Alan Kruger just released a study in March. 95% of new job creation is coming in the form of alternative job holders, not what we think of as traditional corporate. So we're already seeing this. No one's focused on it, but 95% of job growth, that's extraordinary. If you look at the figures today, I deal in the world of independent talent, the gig economy, but at the high end. We're seeing growth at the high end of the gig economy, 64%. MBO Partners just put out a study. The fastest growing segment is people earning over $100,000 a year. So I think if you start projecting these lines out, I think you're going to see a much more fluid, efficient labor market where people are moving very rapidly from project to project and being hired and retained based on their skills and their specific accomplishments. And this, by the way, is not a new idea. Liberation Management was published 30 years ago by, not Michael Porter, Tom Peters, Search of Excellence, and it's finally happening. So,
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I think sort of completely inevitable now, the trend towards more of this gig-like work. In fact, I think it's, 30% of people under the age of 26 now have participated in the gig economy in some form or another. Hourly work continues to grow as a share of overall work in America. It's now 79 million jobs in America are paid hourly. So I think the trend and the tide in that direction is inexorable. But I think it's also, a potentially very good thing, and I think you were implying that too. I think it's both scary and also very exciting, because if you think about the problem we have in America today, it's not an unemployment problem, it's an underemployment problem, and a lot of that comes because we've designed these things as big monolithic rocks where there's just a lot of inherent inefficiencies, and if we break them into smaller pieces, I think it creates a lot of opportunity.
Sri, what do you see in the future?
I mean, I think I certainly agree with the idea that we're dealing with a more flexible model, more more scheduled, more tightly scheduled, more gig. I'm not sure if it completely replaces the work as we know it, or if it's a complement, right? And that's the part that nobody's quite sure if that's going to work out. So if you look at the other side, which is what happens to the traditional work, I think that goes back to what's going on with the middle income part of the U.S. economy, which hasn't really been doing all that well for at least 20, 25 years, right? And so it depends a little bit on the choices that we make as a nation about how you bolster that middle and how you reinforce the income growth, because we've talked about the future of work, but it's really about the future of incomes. Right. And to the extent that we are able to bolster that, you might see sort of a combination of the gig economy and this sort of traditional work.
I would just point out on the income growth, if you look at markets where they have moved to more of a free agent model, think about Hollywood, think about sports, baseball, what happens is talented people, talent actually becomes more valuable, and they can command higher wages in the market. So I think there is a world in which if you have the right infrastructure, this actually enables more leverage for people with the skills and talent that are in demand.
Right. So it seems like everyone agrees that the idea of flexible work, kind of piecing together your career, your profession, that's not going anywhere. So I wonder what that means when we talk about the social safety net and if that needs to be rethought. Right now, there are so many things that are tethered to work. There's so many safeties and benefits that are tethered to the idea of working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, if not longer. So What happens to the social safety net? Doesn't need to be rethought, Peter.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly the system we have today is broken. The bifurcation between 1099 W-2 is just it just doesn't work for this new economy, and we have to fix it. And I don't know if the answer is a third way or if we just have to work at the edges of each of those two. But the current structure is really is not doing either businesses a service or the worker a service, and therefore not doing America a service.
I mean, it does raise an interesting question, right? Certainly to the extent that the benefits have been tied to an employer, right? The breakdown of that relationship means, who's going to provide the benefits. I would argue it also matters to skill development, right? And we've talked a lot about individual companies that are doing a lot of amazing things to train their workers and apprentice their workers. But if that relationship is breaking down, then what do we do with skill development? Who's going to be doing that, right? And who's part of that signaling mechanism? It can't just be an individual employer then.
And we're unusual. I mean, the U.S. is very unusual in industrialized nations, and it was sort of a historical fluke that so much of our social safety net is tied to traditional employment. And if you really think about it, it's a huge impediment to entrepreneurship and small business. It's a very big advantage that nobody focuses on, that so much of the social safety net is tied to employment, because these big companies, I'm a small business owner, we could not get health care because we're in small and in multiple states, which literally makes us almost uninsurable. And this is something that we never hear about. The actual burden that's been placed on companies is an advantage to them, which is one reason I think it has not been fixed, and something we should all think about.
Do you guys agree with that? It's actually an advantage?
Oh, I think definitely for, it basically is reinforced big business, right? It helps bolster them, it defends their turf. So I think there's no question that it's been it's been propelled by that and reinforced by that.
And I think you have to look at this in the global context. So yes, it's an advantage to the extent that you are a U.S. company, that you're working in the U.S. context, right? It's a disadvantage if you're a small manufacturer and you're competing in a global marketplace, right? And you're seeing a foreign competitor who can offer products that are cheaper than you in the supply chain, right? This is a problem.
Right. What needs to happen for the U.S. to maintain competitiveness?
I mean, I think we have to focus on growth, right? I mean, if you think about the decline of manufacturing, there's sort of a narrative in this country that the decline is inevitable and that we should just find ways to move on. There's nothing inevitable about the decline of manufacturing, right? It declines as a share of the economy, but that's just because people spend on healthcare and education. That's nothing to do with manufacturing. But there's been an absolute decline in US manufacturing output, and that's something that is sort of unique to the US. Only the UK has seen something similar, and you can sort of see the political similarities as well, right? And so those are choices that we've made. So you have to figure out how you reinforce growth. How do you get public investment back into manufacturing? How do you create sort of a level playing field? Not for the largest multinational firms, because they'll figure it out, right? It's more for the mid-sized companies and the small companies, because that's where you see the hollowing out happening.
Right. So I'm wondering, when we talk about the gig economy, Jody, you talked about workers who are doing flexible work at the very top of the scale. I think when a lot of people think of this, they think about workers who are kind of on the bottom end of the scale, who are doing things like Uber, et cetera. Thank you. So my question is there a way to bridge that gap, and are we sure that when it comes to flexible work that everyone will be taken care of? Is there a way to create kind of a middle class out of these jobs? Peter, you want to start? Jody?
So a couple things. You talk about flexibility. I was just talking back there. At the high end, flexibility is not what drives people to the gig economy. We survey our folks all the time, and flexibility is 3 or 4 on the reasons they like it. Number 1 and number 2, believe it or not, are they want to pick who they work with and what they work on. It's professional control. Most of the people in our pool are male. They mirror the MBA pool. Most of them are in the sweet spot of their career. They're not retirees. And they don't want to be told on Monday morning, you've got to do a 6-month project in Timbuktu and get on a plane. They want to decide. So it's very interesting that what's driving the high end is not necessarily flexibility. At the low end, lower skill level, I think Peter thinks it is flexibility. And my answer to your question is we must deal with the economic reality of a work model that is in transition, because we are not yet in a place where there's secure enough project flow that, and the wages are not high enough that someone who is in the low end of the gig economy is secure. And so, in my view, government needs to step in and acknowledge that 30% of the workforce is working this way today. It's supposed to go up to 50% by 2020. I think we do need to make changes. Portable benefits, all sorts of things.
Yeah, I tell you though, so I agree with the control. I think there is a common theme there at sort of all wage levels. I think the idea of people feeling empowered, but I certainly flexibility is a big deal. In our case, 30% of the people on our platform are still in school of some kind, so being able to mix and match around their schedules is super critical. But I think also we see just a growing appetite with these younger people to be able to do that, to be able to sort of, one of our largest clients, big retailers, losing workers for the first time this year to these on-demand platforms, making a little bit less without benefits and without the security, but they're doing it because of that feeling of control and empowerment, but also that flexibility, the ability just to open up your phone and find work and pick work. So I think that's a big factor.
Can I just add one thing to this? Certainly if you are an established worker, a higher skilled worker, I think, this is a great thing for you, right? But when we think about the lower end, it's not just the low skilled workers, right? It's also, we've talked to nurses, for instance, right? New graduate nurses, and you would think, that's a relatively skilled occupation, right? But you have nurses who can't find work at a single hospital because the hospital has done such a good job at scheduling demand and predicting demand, right? And so you have new graduate nurses who are essentially stitching together 40 hours a week by working 6 hours here, 4 hours there, 1 hour here, 5 hours there, right? And you have all of these kinds of issues about who pays the benefits, who's providing support. Those issues come up even in that context.
Right. And you mentioned income and wages before. We've seen in more traditional jobs there hasn't been a ton of wage growth, especially in the middle. I think a lot of people would like to believe that when you kind of are able to stitch together all of these jobs, it could amount to even more than you were making before. Do you think that's a reality, or do you think what we see, at least in the near term, is more wage volatility and more stagnation?
No, I think it's certainly a reality for, I guess, for those college-educated folks who are, I guess, sort of like me. So I have to question my career assumptions here. It's certainly a reality, I think, for people like me, but I don't think it's a reality for people like those new nurses or certainly for the Uber drivers, right? I mean, what you see, the majority of independent work in the US today is still being done as a secondary income, right? It's not done as the primary income. And so, these are people who are essentially kind of doing some kind of scheduled, they're at the receiving end of the sort of the scheduling, and so they're adjusting for that by doing, the Uber stuff and the Airbnb stuff on the side to try to top things up, right? My view is that that's not a sustainable model, right? Something has to give, either to provide a benefit so that there's a floor, so these people don't have to worry about basic issues like healthcare or housing, or you have to strengthen the middle and create a much larger market, right? A much larger market growth to create more products and services that then generate employment.
I suppose I'm really very optimistic about this, though, because I think the great thing about this new economy is that actually it's providing opportunities for more mobility, more flexibility, more mobility. We see a lot of people who want the variety, embrace the variety. These new platforms now are creating an opportunity where you're hiring people you wouldn't have hired. I mean, we get into a car today, with strangers. So the same principle applies now. There are people who wouldn't have had opportunities were it not for these platforms. And I think we're going to definitely see a continuation of growth from that. And I think that creates ultimately a much greater meritocracy.
Right. Sure. You talked about the possibility of creating some type of floor. What do you guys think of the universal basic income ideas that have been floating around? Is that something or something similar that should happen in order to create kind of a base level so that people can pursue these other opportunities?
I'm not entirely, so universal basic income comes in many different flavors, right? Yeah. It's not just as simple as, you get a check in the mail for $1,000 every month. That's certainly one form of it. But universal basic income could be in the form of comprehensive health insurance, right? Everybody gets health insurance, like no questions asked, and then that's, you take care of everything else. It could be in the form of subsidies for other things. It really depends on how UBI is executed, right? And I think honestly, the answer is nobody quite knows, right? Which is why you have the experiments in Finland to try to figure out, is this a disincentive for people to stop to work? Or is it actually creating a market that's robust enough that actually attracts more people to come in and work, right? I don't know if we have any evidence one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less about whether it's UBI or some other solution. I think the important thing is to recognize we are in a moment of massive transition in the labor market. And it's not just the independent work and the gig economy, it's AI, it's all the new skills, it's the skills gap. And because of that, the infrastructure and the training that will help people move from where we are to where we need to be isn't in place. And so the question is, how do we help those people who are being hurt in this transition? This is not unique. It happened in the Industrial Revolution, and I think the role of government and business to solve this is critical. And there are a lot of ways you could solve it, and I think it's very important that we solve it, because otherwise you're going to lose support for the innovation that I think you can gain by some of the transition that's happening. But if we don't protect the people being hurt, we're going to have issues.
Where do you guys think the onus is when it comes to protecting workers as these transitions happen? Is it private employers? Is the onus on workers to get training? Is it on the government to create protections?
I think whatever we do, it mustn't be, reinforcing the role of big employers, right? Because, we want to head to a future. I think it's exciting to head to a future where there is a growth in entrepreneurship, and we all, we embrace and empower people. So whatever we do, and I agree that we need to create a better infrastructure and a better foundation. It needs to be done, in a way that's thoughtful, that isn't just in favoring the status quo or large entrenched interests.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think we have a significant first mover problem, which is more so in this country than in others, I think. And that's, so an individual employer will say justifiably, right, that if they invest a whole lot of money in training their workers, all it takes is for a neighboring company to raise wages by a little bit, and these workers will move. And that's a valid argument, right? And so, we sort of have a situation where as a nation, we've sort of decided we don't want to pick winners and losers, but we leave it to the individual firms and the individual cities and the counties to decide, and what they end up doing is focusing exactly on keeping an individual plant open or trying to get a specific firm to come and invest. And, you end up picking winners and losers, even though you're trying not to pick winners and losers, right? So the answer, I think, to your question is there has to be some kind of coordination. It's beyond the scope of any one firm or any one government agency or any one local government to solve the problem. What you need is scale, because with the scale and the mobility, you get more of this sort of, if you're able to get people to move from one firm to another, one industry to another, that's how you get incomes to grow.
And do you see the possibility of that happening in the near term?
I think so. I mean, there's plenty of initiatives out there. There's a lot of regional initiatives, whether it's in the Great Lakes region, the other parts of the Midwest have tried to do it. There's portions of the Mid-Atlantic that are trying to do it. There are many of these cities that are kind of banding together to try to create these sort of mega regions in a way, right, to try to get that kind of scale and get that cohesion across boundaries. So there's a lot of ideas out there, and I think the question is which ones work, and then how do you scale that up, and I think we're still in the experiment.
Right. And when we talk about these mega regions, as you said, a lot of times I think when we think about flexible work, when we think about innovation around this, it happens in cities and around cities, and that can leave out a lot of suburban and rural workers. So how are you guys thinking about the ways that flexible work, gig economy, innovation can reach those workers who are also undergoing some of the trauma from a changing workplace? Jody?
One of the great things that's happening is a lot of the platforms today are enabling remote work. So if you look at a platform called Upwork, what used to be called Elance, if you're into this world, 99% of the work done on that platform is remote. Now, much of that is actually cross-border. A lot of what they're doing is finding people around the world who can do web design and things like that, or coding. But the fact of the matter is, more and more work can be done remotely, and ultimately that will benefit the population you're talking about as well.
Yeah, and I would say, in an environment where public investment is falling, geographic mobility is falling, right, and you have communities that are essentially getting hollowed out, I would rather have the tech platforms, because at least it gives you some opportunities, helps you cushion the blow a little bit, than not have the tech platforms. And I think the question is that a replacement for what you think would need to happen? And I'm not quite sure. I think you still need the investment in those local communities.
Right. So a lot of the conversation among legislators, among lawmakers, when it comes to protecting workers, someone mentioned 1099 employees, has seemed reactive and not proactive. And the thing that I hear a lot is that it's really hard to anticipate how an industry is going to change, and thus to try and create protectionary law around it. Do you guys think we know enough about the future of work, or at least the future of flexible work in the gig economy, to perhaps start being proactive about creating worker protections? Jody?
Yeah, I mean, not only do I think we know, you have people like Sarah Horowitz, who founded the Freelancers Union, who have, been working very hard to provide guidance and leadership around what needs to happen. You've got Aspen Institute has a Future of Work initiative, and Senator Warner is leading some legislative changes. So there is, I think, some proactive effort. It's not the highest priority on anybody's list, and I think that's an issue. And you've got a lot of entrenched interests. I mean, if you look at what happened with Uber, take away what you think of Uber, you end up also finding yourselves on the opposite side of unions in this case. And so there's a lot of political dynamics that have to be sorted out. But I think there are people who are trying to become leaders in driving this.
Well, and I mean, just because it's such a complex issue, just narrow down on one aspect of that, which is health benefits. It's ridiculous today that you kind of either have them or you don't have them. The idea that they belong to the employer, that they can't be portable, that if you work 20 hours, you don't get to accrue some benefits here. And if you work, rather than working 40 hours with one employee, you work 20 with one and 20 with the other, that you can't somehow, share and pool those benefits is ridiculous. So I think there's a very concrete opportunity for us to sort of really solve that problem.
Sri, do you agree with that? Do you think we're at the point where we can start formulating things and solving the problem?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's enough of an installed base, there's enough critical mass, right? And we've already had a track record just in the last 2 or 3 years, right, of institutions banding together to start resolving some of these issues. So I think we already have a pretty decent sense. I mean, there may be more, but at least we have a good sense to get going.
Audience, if you could join me in thanking our panel for their time.
That is a wrap. Thank you so much, Jody, Peter, Sri, and Jillian, and all our speakers and moderators today. We covered a lot of ground, from Atlanta's story to redefining education, the meaning of work, the jobs of tomorrow, and the government's role in all this. I think the former carrier worker who we met earlier today exemplified the story best. He said, "I used to be at the screw," he said, and then automation came. We're in the midst of a massive transition, as we've just heard, and it is a fascinating and evolving story. My thanks to Lumina Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and Georgia Power for making this conversation possible. Mostly thanks to all of you. You've been a wonderful audience, and I know how precious your time is, so thank you for spending so much of it with us. If you would do me one last favor before you part, you have on your chairs, and we'll get in an email, a survey from me. We'd love your feedback. It really makes a difference to us to know how you experienced the day. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you again for coming.